Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Right 92 Open Source Working Group. Thank you for joining us at this early hour here and also online participants. First, before we hand you over to our speakers, a few administrative matters. We have a scribe from the Right NCC. Thank you. There's live stenography of the session. The session is also recorded and live streamed and will be published afterwards. The RIPE Code of Conduct, of course, applies to this session. And should you have any concerns, feel free to talk to us or the Code of Conduct team. Remember to rate all of our speakers afterwards. We, of course, make the selection for each session, but we do that based on your input. And also, we pass on your ratings and comments to the speakers, so we can all improve even more next time. And also, if you have subjects that you would like to discuss, or you would like to see that you would like to discuss in the working group, or would like to see us cover in the future, or you have another speaker in mind, always feel free to approach us this week or later. We have sent our minutes from RIPE 91 to the list quite some time ago. I see no comments. I see no one running to the microphone or aggressively waving, so those are approved. We have a number of interesting talks for you today. Lightning talk is missing.
Yeah, we'll fix that, but there is a lightning talk.
Yes, so we have application security and IXP manager perspective, the Nominet DNS font, a development story about Container Lab, and finally, how much of BERT is actually vibe coded, and then one lightning talk at the end. And also, I wanted to mention that we are working on an improved chair selection procedure. We've been working on it for a while, and that will come to the mailing list probably in the next few weeks for you to discuss and possibly agree with. And I think we can hand it over to our first speaker. So Barry, please join us, and we'll hear from Barry O'Donovan on application security and IXP manager perspective.
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks, chairs. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to see so many people here bright and early. My name is Barry O'Donovan. I'm from INEX, and I am the IXP manager, I suppose, lead developer. So I'm going to give you a little talk about web application security. And why web application security? This is a conference of network engineers. So I think just to try and contextualize this a little bit, more and more we have web applications that give essentially access to our production environment. IXP Manager itself generates root server configurations at INEX and many other IXPs. It feeds into automated provisioning of switches. It is our central source of truth for member data. So the attack surface has grown. And even if you don't have a public-facing website or some kind of customer or member self-provisioning tool, you probably have some kind of APIs. You're probably using some kind of public APIs to get data. And of course, you have staff. And Sasha gave a presentation at the plenary, which made me very nervous. But we now see that there are, you have internal threats as well in terms of your staff just using your web application, not even being compromised directly. And so, we're in an era of unprecedented regulatory scrutiny. So a web application compromise is far more than just the sort of old-fashioned egg on your face, our website has been defaced. It is now a potential compromise of your production systems. I'm not going to linger on this slide too long. I just want to highlight this excellent resource that OWASP have, which is it's called the OWASP Top 10 list, and it's the top 10 web application issues that they find. So if you take, for example, the first one, broken access control, they say in their studies, in their in their reviews of web applications, 100% of applications have some form of access control problem. Whether that is on the sort of lower end of the scale, maybe user enumeration through lost password, or maybe something more serious, or something like not just implementing restriction by default and then elevating permissions as you need them. So it's an excellent resource. It's very, very readable. Even if you're not involved directly in web application development, you're probably adjacent to a team who is, maybe you're managing a team. So it's definitely something you should read. And as I say, it is very, very digestible. So just a quick bit on IXP Manager for anyone who doesn't know what it is. It's a free and open source platform for IXPs. It's been around for quite a while, and I'll talk about legacy in a minute, but we created it before 2005, and we did the first major upgrade of it in 2005, and we open sourced it in 2010. The IXP Manager website on ixpmanager.org has lots of information, and it has a very good community section. It lists all the users of the application that we know about, but it also gathers statistics, and it does that every single night. And it talks about the methodology on the website, but suffice to say that it's an underestimation. So what we know is that there's at least 262 exchanges using IXP Manager, which connect over 14,000 networks, and of those, about 8,000 are unique. So that's a bunch of networks peering at multiple exchanges. There's almost 500 terabits of connected capacity, not core capacity. And that's over almost 21,000 ports. So that kind of reminds us, it's something to be very proud of for INEX, but it also reminds us that we have a significant responsibility in the software that we release. So just talking about legacy, I did say that IXP Manager is a 20-year-old application. That isn't to say that the code base is 20 years old. We'll get into that in a second. But it is to say that over time, you make certain assumptions, and many years ago, not many years ago, but 10 plus years ago, the web was a much more user-friendly place. If you forgot your password and you put in your email address into a box, it would tell you, we've now emailed you a password reset, or it would tell you, dude, you've used the wrong email. Now we say, if you entered an email that's registered, you will get an email. So all of these things change over time. So what was acceptable in 2010 is a risk in 2026. Rewriting isn't realistic. IXP Manager is a massive application. It's very broad and very deep. I remember one time someone said to me, I'm going to rewrite IXP Manager in 2 weeks in Python because PHP is insecure. Besides the naivety of that statement on both counts, he came back to me about 6 weeks later and said, yeah, I couldn't do that in 6 weeks, let alone 6 months. So it is a very deep application. And of course, as I said in the last slide, success raises the stakes. There's over 262 exchanges using it, so we have to be very mindful of that in the changes we make. When we do framework upgrades, that also has knock-on effects into operating system requirements, into the version of PHP that you're using, and so forth. So while IXP Manager is a legacy application, the IXP Manager, as it is today, is a very modern web application. So it has no real resemblance to the one that we would have used in 2005 and open sourced in 2007. In 2005, we were using PHP 4 and Pear, if anyone remembers that, with a huge amount of Perl tooling around it that did the root server configurations and things like that. In 2007, we went on to what became the new paradigm of web applications, the model view controller system with Zen Framework 1. And we had that for a long time, probably a lot longer than we should have, because we didn't switch to Zen Framework 2 or 3 because they were very, very different. It was a rewrite rather than a simple upgrade. And in 2015, over the course of 4 years, we dual stacked Zen Framework and Laravel, which is a very long period of time, but it kind of shows you how difficult it is to fully upgrade a web application. So we would move it controller by controller, application by application. And we still had some legacy stuff in there. We were still, for example, using Doctrine. So over another 2 years, we removed that and switched to Eloquent for Laravel. So the only piece of legacy we have today is something called Foil, which I doubt any of you have heard of. It's a PHP templating engine that uses PHP rather than a templating language. So that is something that we're going to also work to remove. Laravel, if you don't know what it is very like Ruby on Rails. It is a very modern web application framework that's used by tens of thousands of applications. It's probably the most popular web application framework today. So as just as a sort of a reassurance, you know, in terms of having a legacy application where we keep upgrading it under the hood, we do have kind of what we would say layered defenses in how we release code and how we test code. So we have a very mature continuous integration pipeline, which uses static code analysis, and it also has unit testing, hundreds and hundreds of unit tests, including front-end unit tests now. So I think nearly the entire front end is fully unit tested. Supply chain security is probably the biggest current threat facing most web applications. Whether you're doing something in Node or Ruby or PHP, when you require some third-party application or third-party library, that library has a bunch of requirements, and then they have a bunch of requirements. And suddenly you've added one library to your code base, which in turn has added 25. So this is the problem with, you know, a supply chain. One of the things we try and do is not use third-party libraries for simple stuff. I mean, there's a very famous Node example of that from years ago where a very simple one function library got compromised. So we only try and use it for stuff that's sort of broader. But we also use GitHub's Dependabot, which is an excellent tool for keeping us secure. Penetration testing we'll talk about in a second. We do have a secure application development policy, which is published on the xpmanager.org website, and that allows other users of XP Manager to include that in their own ISMS process about how XP Manager is developed. And then we use anything else that's available to us in GitHub, like, you know, two-factor authentication, branch protection. There's only 2 people that are allowed actually push code to the release branches, secret scanning, and so forth. And just to be clear, we're not at all claiming that we're perfect by any means, but we're just saying that we are committed to continuous improvement. So independent security assessments, these are always kind of nerve-wracking when someone comes to you and says, we've done a penetration test on your application, and the first 3 of these, we found out about them after the fact. So users of XP Manager, the NCC group one was used in a non-IX environment. It was in a government environment. It was given to us under NDA, so I'm just trying to be a little bit careful. But it's used in a sort of a government network where they have the telcos of that country peer with each other over their private exchange. So that supplier used the NCC group to pen test their entire solution, and that pen test report came to hundreds of pages, and they carved out the pieces to do with XP Manager and gave them to us. And then I'll talk about Anissa in a second. In terms of the actual results of these pen tests, they were reassuring in the sense that there was no major red alerts. What it was mostly about was that sort of legacy. It was okay once upon a time, but it's not okay now. So user enumeration through lost password. We didn't have good enforcements on passwords. One was disable PHP info by default, but that was only available to admin users anyway. But we did disable it by default, even though it's very useful. Again, it's the user experience diminishing, but security increasing. And there's always some cross-site scripting issues that come up. It's kind of like whack-a-mole, but I'll tell you in a second about how we try and address that. The GRNet one, or GRIX, the Greek Internet Exchange, they came back with 5 cross-site scripting errors. 4 you had to be an admin. I'm not suggesting that's an excuse for having them. I'm just trying to just putting some context on it. And 1 was potentially a user logged in, a member logged in, but there was no proof of concept for that. And then we got another one from the NCC group in 2024. And you'll see all of these are quite recent. And that's because of this increasing regulatory environment that we're in, these organizations are now saying we need to do these pen tests. So all of these are from 2020 rather than before 2020. So the big one was ENISA. And ENISA is the European Union's Agency for Cybersecurity. And in 2022, the EU created a program called the Cybersecurity Support Action Program. The role of that program was to get individual member states to get their critical and essential infrastructure into a better footing from a cybersecurity perspective. What they said from an ex ante and a ex post capabilities. So in Ireland, our National Cybersecurity Centre was assigned to oversee that program. And in Ireland in 2021, our health service suffered a cyber attack right in the middle of COVID, which took out the IT system of the hospitals for weeks. And out of that, the government created what they call a core group. And the core group was to create these subgroups related to government functions, so health, education, transport, digital, and to create these groups where they would pull people together from industry and create a shared space where you could share information on threats, you could pool resources for education, and then if there was a cyber attack, that you could pool resources to help fix it. So INEX is part of DigiCore, which is a digital industry group, and they invited members of DigiCore to submit applications for one of 3 cybersecurity packages. And one of the packages was a web application penetration test service. So INEX applied to have XP Manager put into that. As part of our application, we did say that beyond just the benefit to Ireland and Ireland's digital economy, it would also be of benefit to about 60 IXPs within Europe, plus over 260 worldwide. And our application was accepted, and the assessment took place in February of this year. We released version 7 of XP Manager in August last year, and that was a huge upgrade. It now required PHP 8.4, for example, which was the latest version of PHP at the time. And it used the latest versions of the frameworks that we use and so forth. So it was a pen test on the current version of XP Manager. They used what's called the gray box methodology, which is where we create a production-like environment of XP Manager and we give them access to it. So we give them usernames and passwords. So rather than them wasting time trying to break down the door, we let them in and say, right, have at it, lads, and see what you can do here. A white box methodology would have probably have been much better. A white box is where you have access to the source code as well, and XP Manager being open source, that would have been easy. But this was sort of an off-the-shelf package. And the company that did it was called S2 Grupo. They used a combination of AI and human penetration testing. The AI stuff was kind of obvious. You know, you'd see 20,000 hits in the logs over the space of an hour. And the human stuff was people just going in there and trying to inject stuff into the database and stuff. The results were, kind of sweating the results before they arrived, but they were quite relieved when they did finally arrive, in that there was no high or critical risks. So the highest problem they found got a CVSS score of 6.7, and that was a cross-site scripting. It was 2 cross-site scripting problems. They found the lack of headers. This goes back to Sasha's presentation in the plenary about content security policy. So we'll talk about that, the X-frame options in a second. They called it user enumeration. It was user ID, like database primary key enumeration. And then they found an information disclosure, which they were 50-50 on actually including, because it was an SQL query in an exception that was printed. They were like, well, look, it's an open source application. The stuff is obvious anyway. But they were right to include it. We shouldn't be putting SQL queries in error messages. So all of those have been addressed in 7.2, which we released last week. The only one we haven't done is the CSP, which requires more research. That looks a little bit more complicated than something we can just rush out the door. But we did mitigate that issue with the X-Frame options. So their issue there, and this isn't an IXP Manager specific thing, this is an all web application thing. And that is that they're all vulnerable to clickjacking if you're not using content security policy or if you're not using this X-Frame options deny. So without these, it allows your application to be embedded in an iframe and then have someone put something over it, which might be invisible on the website, so that when you click on what you think is your application, you're really clicking on something else. So anyone who has web applications, the easiest mitigation possible is just a very simple deny. And what have we done since? We've released 7.1 shortly after the pen test was done, but before we got the results. One of the things that IXP Manager has is that it has a public-facing website by default. I don't think this is feasible in the medium term, but we are where we are at the moment. So what we did in 7.1 is we moved over 70% of all URLs behind the /admin prefix. So now on your web browser, or sorry, on your web server, you can use IP ACLs to restrict access to that. In 7.2, which was the release of the release that fixed all of the issues, we have a new developer. He developed quite an innovative way of doing cross-site scripting. So instead of spending an awful lot of time trying to inject cross-site scripting code into input fields, he just went into the database and put them all into every column, then browsed the website and figured out where we weren't escaping that stuff on presentation. So he fixed many templates with that, although there are no known proof of concepts, but they're all taken care of. My time is up. I think the key takeaway really is, look, penetration testing is good. Don't be embarrassed by it, but it is a very useful thing to do. Our new developer is fully funded by sponsors, so we thank them. Many of them are here actually, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Barry. And yes, what you said on content security policy, it's powerful, but it can be a challenge. I've heard it from more places. We have a little bit of time for questions.
Hi, Peter Lexis Powerdiness. I'm going to say I have a comment, but that's more towards the room than towards you. If you have a small project and don't not have the money for a penetration test, you could contact like the Sovereign Tech Fund or something, or an organization like that to get some funding to get these tests in, and I can highly recommend doing these kinds of tests.
Yeah.
Maybe you could, if you have some organizations that do that, you could send it to the mailing list.
I'll see if I can compile a list. Thanks.
Thanks. Line is closed also. Maria.
Maria, developing Bird. I like to say you are quite common with those 4 years of rewriting 2 different frameworks. It took us more than 5 years to update the backend to multi-threaded. So it's a long time. It's a long time which is needed.
Yeah.
And it's always like you think in the beginning that it's for 3 months, and then it's gonna be 5 years because you didn't see how it looks like. But what I wanted to ask, how much time does it take for you to keep up with all the dependencies updated? For us, we don't have almost any, so we don't do it. But
yeah, no, it is a lot. It is very time consuming, and unfortunately, there is a cost to that. And that when you're doing that stuff, you're not creating new features for the users. But tooling like GitHub's Dependabot is really helpful for that kind of thing. And when we're doing new releases, even if they're just bug releases, we'll always release the latest framework. But it is challenging.
yep, thank you.
I have 2 questions, one from myself, the other one is remote. I'll start with Proxim Maximilian Emig, who's asking how many % of security issue reports you get are real. Several FOSS projects received a large number of invalid LLM hallucinated reports, unfortunately.
Yeah, we have been very fortunate in that we haven't been struck by what I see in other projects I'm involved in, wide-ranging LLM things. So we've avoided most of that. We get a couple, but very few so far.
Thank you. And me, this is Marco Sanz, speaking for myself. would you recommend if other open source projects to participate in this ENISA's cybersecurity program if the opportunity?
Oh,
arises
absolutely,
again?
absolutely. I think, and as the gentleman from PowerDNS said, there are multiple programs. I think we're past the point where people should be embarrassed by what comes out of these and take them as an excellent learning experience. Because even if the findings aren't high or critical risks, you learn something from the low and medium ones. So I think I would absolutely recommend everyone to do it, and don't be embarrassed by the results. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Amy and Dave talking about the Nominet DNS fund. By the way, we are, of course, as you're aware, that the live transcription isn't working, but it is being worked on and hopefully will be fixed as soon as possible.
Great, thanks, Sasha. Hello, everyone. We're really delighted to be here, and hello to everyone online. It's great to see so many faces after such a great social last night as well. My name's Amy O'Donnell. I'm Social Impact Lead at Nominet, and this is my colleague Dave. Do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone.
So Nominet run the registry for the .uk domain, and we are, by our very setup, a public benefit company. It's in our Articles of Association, and we are a company limited by guarantee. So my role at Nominet is to look at that surplus funding that we have and think about what public benefit activities we can support. Now, in the past, that has looked at quite general things like digital skills, digital inclusion, but we've really taken a strategic step to move those activities a lot closer to our core business. Hence, we'd like to present to you very humbly, with a very much a learning hat on, our DNS fund. So this was launched in pilot in September last year to look at the security, sustainability and resilience of open source DNS projects. We're very much on a learning journey, so we're here to ask a question of you, and that is, are we doing the right things as we adapt to what we've learned? And we're really honoured that a few of the applicants, the successful applicants that we're funding, are in the room, and so we're also going to hear from them and hear their reflections on how things are going. So without further ado, the first place that we started, and I'd like to take you back to 2023, was that we commissioned our research. This is something we always do, is really understand the ecosystem and the landscape. So we worked with Demos, who are an incredible London-based think tank, to look at the options of what we could do. And while there were lots of things out there around digital skills, around human rights, impact assessment frameworks, we centered on this idea of the maintainers of core open source DNS. And they flagged to us that there were three key kind of problems in this space, in funding this space. You may or may not agree, and we welcome your feedback as well. But the first being that the majority of funding stems from corporates rather than foundations, which can bias some of that development. We've seen funding not necessarily be available to individuals, only projects or registered organizations, and single source funding, so one funder, one project. So that led us to launch our DNS fund. As I say, we launched it in September of last year. The window was open for about just over a month. And we had an application window, 370,000 GBP, and it was available to anyone to apply for up to £100,000, but we could go as low as, and there was no minimum amount, because what we recognised was a lot of the developers and maintainers in this space weren't always looking for this significant amount. And we're really delighted, actually, that we will be launching a second window next month, which will be quite a substantial amount more money. We'll go into a bit more of the detail of the changes that we're going to make. How did we end up in this place? Well, originally, we were looking at our traditional funding model at Nominet, which is where we would do our research, we would identify organisations operating in a space ahead of time and reach them, rather than offering an open call. But we decided and established in this space that it was much sort of more of an opportunity to open that call up to anyone to apply. But what we feel very conscious of is your time is really precious and really sacred. So we wanted to make that application as tight as possible. And something our advisory panel really recommended us was to keep the applications to the length of a coffee, so 20 minutes. Now, that might be ambitious. Some people may say they spent more or less time than others. But we really want to try and keep that application as what we called minimum viable bureaucracy. We originally went out to another third sector, a third partner as well, to look at whether they could help us administer the fund. That didn't work out for a number of reasons. So we decided to take it in-house and just run it under the name of Nominet. And actually, we think it's worked out quite well that way. So I'll just go back to my first slide, which was to say, we hope we've addressed the first problem, because we're not trying to influence the development of these projects. You know, you apply and come to us with what you want to see funded. And while originally we did have eligibility criteria that meant you had to be a registered organisation, we have made our way around this, and we are looking at funding individuals. So there's just a few small administrative things that we're looking at. It's less money, and we're looking at things like liability insurance and how strict and stringent we can be on that, but we really are trying to be as adaptable as possible. So that's one major thing that will be changing moving forward. And on the third, I think it's just early days for us, and we'd love to look at other funders and whether we can join forces. What made this sort of credible and feel like we were able to proceed and make the right decisions was our incredible expert advisory panel. So we really wanted to go to those people in the space that know their stuff. Someone mentioned Sovereign Tech Agency earlier, so we had Mirko help us make that connection there, even though he's since left, and a number of our Nominet members and members of ICANN and Hannah, who did that original research for us. So they were really influential in us, how we set up the fund, which we did from a kind of principles basis, but also in that inevitable selection. And these were the principles that they ended up working with us to agree upon. And we hope that this helps us to just be really transparent in what we're looking for and why we're doing what we're doing. Originally there were 7, and we've just tried to, one of our values is to keep it simple. So we've cut that down to 5. Really interested in your feedback on this, if you get a chance in the questions or later afterwards. Particularly, I've seen someone in a FOSDEM t-shirt. I was at FOSDEM this year, and people were really challenging us on this question 3, criteria 3 of proven use. That for us, it's really important that we stick true to the idea that we want to fund maintainers of the core foundations of open source infrastructure. We don't necessarily want to fund innovation. We don't want to necessarily go for the sparkly new things. But some people are saying to us, there are other things like maybe education or participation of young people in the processes of this, or indeed making sure that some of the technologies being built now are future-proofed or looking at the horizons. So that's one for us to unpack as we move forward. So that means a culmination of all these things. We're changing 3 key things as we get ready to launch next year. You'll see more money and also some new advisory panel members that we'll announce next month. But we've also got some guidelines for individuals to apply. So maintainers that are operating on their own don't necessarily need to be registered, but we just need to work with them quite closely on their contracts and how we set them up. We think that's really important. Working on multi-year grants. So one of the feedback from Demos was that sustainability is really important. So while our pilot was only for a one-off grant, we're looking at up to 3 years worth of funding that you can apply for, and then that means you can predictably see that into the future. And as I say, clarity on proven use. So I'll hand to Dave now to just introduce some of our successful applicants for 2025.
Thanks, Amy. So I get to talk about what the first awards are made by the fund and where they're going. So Nominet will support 8 projects this year. 3 of those, the process is still ongoing. So today we can talk about the 5 which are already being awarded. The slide here shows how the fund is supporting things across the DNS ecosystem. So going there from left to right, there's the OpenSSL Foundation, which will support work on the OpenSSL library, which is underpinning encryption in so many technologies, not just DNS. Quad 9 will be receiving funding. That will help their team tackle technical debt, strengthen the infrastructure that they use to provide their public services. The Internet Systems Consortium will use this to replace the Bind9 scalability and performance testbed, which will allow their developers to spot problems earlier. And this was a case where we hadn't originally intended to use this money to buy hardware, but in this case, that's where that is going. So that's a change that we will make going forward into next year. Through OARC, OARC will receive money in support of ValidNS, which is a fast and comprehensive DNSSEC and DNSSEC zone validator. And finally, in LNet Labs, are receiving funding for Cascade, a new purpose-built standalone DNS6 signer. Now, we would like people to come to the mic to ask general questions at the end of this, but what I would like to do right now, if we could take the opportunity, I know there's some people representing some of these projects in the room. I mean, if it would be really helpful if you could come up to the mic now and share any feedback you have on your experience. And, you know, just to sort of set you up, we're kind of specifically interested in, you know, how did you find the process? Are we making the right changes for next year? And would you encourage others in the open source community to apply?
That's fine.
That's good.
So we've got John from Quad 9. Thanks, John. Yeah, please come and share with us.
I guess my comment is this is actually one of the easiest applications we've ever done for a grant. Thank you very much for that. Normally, it's an extremely painful process with a whole lot of internal discussions. But this made it very clear in what we needed to do, that this was focused on software. This was basically going to be code, operational code that we were going to be delivering. So it was quite easy for us to put together. And I think also then the metrics by which we're being measured are actually really great. So it's basically what's ending up in GitHub, does the code work? We're an operations-based organization. We don't really have a development shop. Our code base is widely distributed across a bunch of different projects, but each one of them for our own needs and what we think that the rest of the community needs. There are a bunch of different patches, there are a bunch of different upgrades that we're going to be working on to deploy in for both the visibility and performance areas of our own service, but I think they'll be useful for everybody in the community, not just recursive resolvers with some of the so I want to say that it was really easy, and I really appreciate the fact that it was done thinking about this at the very low layer of people doing code rather than at the much larger organization level.
I'll just say thanks, John. It's very kind, but you can also be honest. And what would you like to see us improve? Are we changing the right things? Have you got ideas for the future?
Improve. Actually, I don't have much. I don't actually.
About education?
Well, okay, yeah, there's one. So one of the things that we're going to be delivering as part of our grant is basically some test bed or examples, best case use or best use case examples of some of the code. Notably, Vector is the one project that we're working on. I gave a talk about that at OARC last time, I think. But being able to tell people that the code that we're doing exists and how to use it, I think is really important, because there are a lot of these big monolithic code bases which are very challenging to get understanding about. And so I think that one of the next things it would be great to do would be to get more education or training in some of these things, so that not just the largest organizations, but sort of the next tier down have a better understanding of how to use certain functions, certain features, or certain code bases in general. So I think that would be a really interesting next step for you.
Thank you, John. All right, Vicky, do you want to come forward? Vicky, tell us a little bit about what we're funding for you, and yeah, be really honest about how we can improve and what you think you'd like to see different.
Okay. Well, we had a 9-year-old hardware test bed. Really, as a virtual organization, we had very little of our own actual hardware. So we're testing everything on virtual machines. But for performance testing, you really need actual computers. Otherwise, you're just testing the VM or AWS infrastructure. So we had this test bed, but it was ancient. I mean, 9 years old, you can't get support anymore. So they actually hadn't anticipated supporting hardware. I was really pleased how flexible they were to consider this, because we have users all the time that ask us for recommendations on how to set up their operating system, and they're running on computers that we simply didn't have the same kind of machine to test on. So we have ordered some hardware. We have had tremendous struggles with delivery. But we have most of the system set up now, and we actually have been able to begin doing some profiling where we just throw a lot of queries at bind running on the system and then measure every 100 milliseconds, what is the system doing? And we do have plans to do some other tests. In fact, we're interested in input from authoritative operators in particular about what they think might be the performance bottlenecks that we can measure. As far as the application process, I've applied for quite a few grants over the years, and this I thought was the most straightforward. Not a very complicated portal with lots of separate things you have to paste in, but I just recall sending one email. I I will say the salient thing to me that was best about this particular grant process was how quick it was. If you need money, you really can't wait for 6 months to find out if you're going to get it. If you need to make another plan. So this, I remember it was about a month from sending in the application to hearing, and that was fantastic. So.
Thanks so much, Vicky. Benno, hi.
Hi, thank
How
you.
you doing?
Hi. Excellent, thanks. So yeah, so we're, well, where to start? I have a long list. So we were sponsored, funded to develop Cascade. It's kind of a standalone, as presented, a standalone DNSX signer. We definitely looked at current developments and ideas in mostly the TLD area, but also developments in the ITF, what's a common practice, and put that in our software. And it's also intended to be a successor of OpenDNSX. So it's also kind of some sort of maintenance, but a rigorous maintenance, and moving forward to a new implementation. And what's really good with the collaboration with Nominet, the DNS Fund, is also, well, you're also active in the outreach. So we kind of piggybacking on your outreach, and that's really important. Get in contact with users, potential users, have this discussion, their input, what are their requirements. So that's really great. And back to what Vicky said, the whole application process was super, very supportive, short turnaround time, not much overhead, and also the reporting is very close to our internal processes. GitHub pull request with a milestone and a report, which not much overhead, very close to our own internal processes, and very supportive staff. So thank you all. And yeah, I think for time, I hand over to Bill.
Yeah, maybe
Thanks.
Benno, just a question
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
you go, and maybe
Yeah.
one for you as well,
Yeah.
Phil. Like one of the things we're interested in is
Yeah.
what would you say to people who want to,
All right.
want to apply next year?
Yeah. Think about it. And what triggered me most with the introduction of DNS Fund, I think, last year, is also maintenance. And that was the first trigger actually, because it's very difficult to get funding for maintenance. For new features, there are different funds to find, or from industry you can get funding. But for maintenance, it's so difficult to get funding. You have to find some internal funding, make reservations, etc. And now in times of LLMs, well, I don't have to repeat the presentation of Peter yesterday. In times of LLMs, maintenance is essential. It's everyday work. You don't get lots of credits, but it's an investment for the future of the product and to our customers and the users. Now, I forgot your question. Oh yeah, to you all, think about, indeed, it's easy to apply for funding. Think about also maintenance, small improvements, stability, because we need that definitely in these times. I think that's a good stop for me here. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, well, we're one of the smaller projects in this whole space. So I just got a few bullet points. I noted about how this has really been. Welcome surprise. We were really not expecting this kind of funding. I mean, this is really timely in that DNS.org, which I've been running for a number of years now, has taken home some, I would say, stray cats of the DNS world in terms of software that was not necessarily either being maintained or was being maintained, but the people who were in charge didn't really have the resources to take care of it. And we'd recently taken over maintenance of ValidDNS, which is a very small piece of code used by some authoritative operators to do some DNS zone validation. And therefore, we thought, okay, how are we going to fund this? And we just hear about the DNS fund. So like John was saying, it was easy to apply, which doesn't mean the bar was so low that anybody could get it, but we could focus on the requirement specifications for actually applying rather than the paperwork, the compliance, and how many did we have industry standard rubber feet and all those things. Anyway, the whole point was we could focus on the actual grant and not all the buzzwords. The funding itself is kind of critical in that it's a vote of confidence. Getting the funding from a panel of qualified, when the review process, going through panel of qualified engineers and knowledgeable people who work in the space, it's an endorsement for the community to say this software is not abandonware. We can use it because it's actually being maintained. And sometimes there's a bit of a chicken egg where people are looking to see, is anybody going to fund this before I use it? Says, well, how about you fund it? Yeah, but I'd like to see if anybody's using it, before I put money into this. Well, that's the kind of thing we got. And it does encourage others maybe to pitch money in. So we like to do, donation matching and trying to get several organizations to contribute. There's other tools we have at OARC that could benefit from this. We found out about the DNS fund shortly before the deadline, so we put together a proposal, but we have other things, other projects that we know the community is using in terms of instrumentation and manipulation of data, DNS data. So we're thinking, of course, of applying and for the other stuff we've got. Yeah, no, fellowship program is one thing we'd like to do. I don't know if that will be in scope. And of course, the maintenance aspect, all software isn't like wine, it doesn't get better. So the ability to go multi-year maintenance for us would be absolutely critical. So we're really happy and looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, Phil, and thank you all so much. I think we're out of time, but just to say, if you do have feedback, if we're making the right changes, if you'd like to see anything different, Dave and I are around, and you can always email us on dnsfund@nominet.uk. Thank you.
So we got time for one question.
Yes, thank you. I think we can do one quick question.
One question.
It's not a question, Sasha. Jim Reed, speaking as an individual, just wandered in off the street. I just want to say thanks to everybody to Nominet for putting this thing together. This is a wonderful initiative, and I'm very, very grateful that this is underway, and you deserve a great deal of thanks for putting this together. And I would like to see more of this kind of thing going on. So thank you.
Jim, thank you.
Next, we have Gordon talking about Container Lab. As an open source maintainer that has also applied for funding, I'm very happy to see Nominet pay attention to the bureaucracy. I've been in projects where I feel I need funding to find the time to apply for this funding. Gordon.
Thank you. My name is Gordon Guido-Favi. I am, during my day job, a consulting systems engineer focusing on data center fabrics over at Nokia. But today I'm talking to you as one of the developers of Container Lab. So what is Container Lab, you might ask? And I sort of asked the same question about half a year ago in Bucharest. And if you would like to see a complete overview of what Container Lab can do for you, I would recommend you check out the RIPE 91 tutorial session I gave. But in short, Container Lab allows you to spin up virtual container topologies that you can then use to run containerized and VM-based network OSs. It provides programmatic interfaces to talk to this sort of topology, and you can essentially use this for either learning or for testing or whatever you would like. And the real nice thing about Container Lab is it runs anywhere where there is a container runtime, either Docker or Podman. So today I will be talking more about the development aspect of Container Lab's background. And I would like to first start with the question of where did it come from? Back in the 2020s, we were working on our then unreleased data center network operating system, SR Linux. And SR Linux is based on unmodified Linux distribution. So we thought, why would we spin up a complete VM when we can actually just do a container? And we found that there were not really any tools out there for creating container topologies. So we created this tool and open sourced it shortly after. And we gave this tool to the community to give it a future. And one of the first early things that we realized was that if the tool is vendor specific, then it's destined to be only maintained by the vendor. So we made it a multi-vendor by design. And after this release in March 2021, word spread by a combination of social media and blog posts. And we had some talks. We first had a talk in July at NANOG Days. Then came a talk at NANOG 83. And finally, we even showed off the tool to some of our friends in the more system infrastructure part of the community at the Open Networking and Edge Summit. And interest exploded. But why? By the time the project had its first public release, when we showed it off at Edinburgh Days, it already had mature architecture, which was due to a rewrite that we had in 2021 March, thanks to one of my very talented colleagues. We had already the multi-vendor support I mentioned, which was the fourth public comment. It had a comprehensive documentation website already available, a very friendly, human-friendly topology format that is actually backwards compatible to this day. If you're familiar with Container Lab, then you can see the topology description on the right of the slide is going to be very, very familiar to you. And this was actually written back in 2021. And finally, when we released the tool, we also gave complete examples on how to use the tool. So we really gave you a 0 to hero in 1 minute sort of topology where you could just go in, clone it, Container Lab deploy, and you had essentially the full life cycle of the tool documented for you. So what did Container Lab at the time bring to the table? It solved a niche problem, but it was becoming not so niche, the ability to run containerized network OSs. And it did so with a fresh and novel approach. And that fresh and novel approach was this lab as code experience that it gave, where you could essentially just give a topology description, a YAML, and you could reproducibly create the same topology over and over, which was a big change compared to the tools available at the time, which were more focused on giving you a GUI where you could interactively edit the topology. And because it's CLI friendly, it's also automation friendly. And as I mentioned, these topologies, they are in text format, so they are very, very easy to share. So if you have a result that you have created with Container Lab, it's very easy to share it with your colleagues and the community. And speaking of community, we already had a Discord server to chat about the development and use of Container Lab set up before the first public talk we gave. So really, the very first public talk, we could already tell people that, hey, if you would like to talk about this tool, if you have questions, come in our Discord and we can chat about it. Now, Container Lab in 2026. Container Lab recently turned about 5 years old. And coincidentally, I myself am about to have my 31st release just tomorrow. So funny coincidence. But right now, there are 4 projects that are sort of in the umbrella of the Container Lab project. One is Container Lab itself, written in Go. The other one is the Visual Studio Code extension that I'll be talking about in just a moment. And we also have the VRNet Lab, which we had to fork to give it Container Lab capabilities. This VRNet Lab project allows us to essentially encapsulate VM-based network OSs into containers. And finally, we have Kubernetes, which allows you to essentially run your Container Lab topologies across a Kubernetes cluster. So it really allows you to really go to the next level with your topology scaling. And we see that we have a mix of Go, TypeScript, and Python projects here in this Container Lab umbrella. So it really takes quite a lot of effort to maintain this. So one thing we did was we have full CI/CD set up for Container Lab and also for the Visual Studio Code extension. We do automated testing and code analysis on every single commit that comes in a pull request. So we can really see code quality ahead of merging any code into the project. We have unit tests for core functionality. We use the robot framework, which is a testing framework for smoke tests, and also to do some very limited network OS basic feature testing. For example, spin up the network OS, give some interface numbering on both sides, and then run a ping across. So really very rudimentary. We're not testing the network OSs themselves here. And we also do code coverage and code quality checks using CodeCarve. And similarly to the actual checking, we also have a release pipeline that is based on GitHub releases. And every time there's a new release, we generate all the release artifacts. So for example, the all the packages for various Linux distributions. And when one wants to use the tool, there is a built-in command that allows users to essentially upgrade to the next version. And this is something we can do because ContainerLab is shipped as a single binary. It's a single Go binary. That is also one of the fresh and novel things that we brought to the table compared to contemporary tools, which might require like a full installation or even an appliance VM. And ContainerLab's releases are not based on a release schedule, so that gives us quite a bit of flexibility in when we can release and when we can carve a new release. When we look at what's new with the project, we see a few changes in the last year that are major milestones. The first thing I want to mention is splitting the core functionality from the command line tool part of the project, and this enables essentially a ContainerLab as library usage, and it also helped other recent developments like the ContainerLab's web server, which allowed us to create a REST API on top of ContainerLab. Another very, very, very recent function that was added thanks to the very hard efforts of my colleague Florian Schwarz was the individual node start-stop functionality, which allows users to start and stop nodes in running topologies on demand. Another piece of work that we put in was the sudo-less feature, which allows users to run ContainerLab without running as root. Right now, we drop some privileges when we don't need it. So for example, if we only do read-only stuff like inspecting the topology, we don't really need the privileges that much. But right now, we still use privileged containers. So some work is still needed there. Finally, the VS Code extension that I'll be talking about in just a moment. Now, community. We have a Discord community with almost 3,500 members. That's a lot of people being active in the community. We have swag, of course. So for example, this shirt over here or the stickers, I'll be giving out some stickers later today. So if you would like one, then come find me in the break afterwards. And we also have frequent talks at NOG events. And interestingly enough, it's not just us ContainerLab developers going around and giving talks, but I've recently started seeing ContainerLab users themselves going out there and giving talks about our project. And that's very, very humbling to see as one of the developers of ContainerLab. But to get here, to this point, we had to go through some challenges, and we would like to share some of the lessons we learned as part of these challenges. First, I would like to open this can of worms at the fact that ContainerLab mainly supports network OSs, and network OSs are not open source or freely available as a rule of thumb. And you sometimes have to accept a license, you have to have an account, you have to have a license to run it. So you might ask, somebody comes to you and says, hey, here's the pull request. This adds support for network OS X. And then you say, okay, but how do I test this? I don't have a contract with that vendor. I don't have that image. So really, you have to rely on community testing. It's really important if you work with closed source tools. And sometimes it's actually worth reaching out to the vendor. And in fact, we saw that some vendors have started reaching out to us, which is very much appreciated. That vendors come to us directly and ask us, hey, can we get support for this network OS out? We'll be releasing it soon as a containerized or as a virtual version. And we would like to have ContainerLab support there from day zero. And that's amazing to see. And I invite more and more vendors to, come to us and let's work together. Now, users, of course, every single open source maintainer would be much happier if there were no users, right? So a container lab, a lot of the users are not really familiar with how open source works. They are more familiar with the commercial software offerings. So sometimes they have mismatched expectations. Sometimes the expectations mismatch is on the feature side. So they expect Container Lab to do things that is not really something we can enable. For example, emulate hardware data plane features, or do, for example, take a copy of your production network and create a virtual equivalent of it. That's not really what Container Lab's core competences are about, but it could be very much a valid component in the solution. So try to understand your users' use cases. Don't tell them, hey, like, you're holding the tool wrong. And this also means that contributors will have sometimes issues reporting their issues. And sometimes the reported problems don't really translate well to code issues and more pertain to, say, a misconfiguration on the network OS side. So a good troubleshooting flow is really a must to have when you're working with, say, network OSs, or your project really interacts with network OSs. And finally, sometimes they come and say, like, hey, why does Container Lab not do X feature? The other thing does it. And sometimes it's by choice, and sometimes it's by lack of contributors. But so be open to feature ideas, but don't be afraid to say, hey, it doesn't do it today, or hey, like, it's not really designed for this. As a quick aside on this topic, I would like to talk about the VS Code extension. At the beginning, Container Lab is really designed to be CLI only. And GUI labbing, it wasn't really the use case. And we even said this in a 2024 presentation at AutoCon 1, that if you're a UI network engineer, Container Lab is not a great fit, and this is by design. But this sort of changed less than half a year later, when two GUIs were contributed for Container Lab. One is the VS Code extension, which is a VS Code extension, and the other one is Antimony, which is a web UI. And Container Lab suddenly became very, very relevant for this use case, and it's really a success story because it really unlocked Container Lab for a lot of users that wouldn't have used Container Lab otherwise. And it's a major growth factor for Container Lab usage. So we saw about 17,000 unique installations from the VS Code App Store, and 16,000 downloads of the extension for VS Codium. And it's a big, big, big undertaking to do a GUI on top of a tool. So sometimes these things have to be their own projects for your own sanity. Sometimes it's such a big feature to add that it's worth its own project. And just as a sneak peek, this is how the VS Code extension looks like. And now for development. Maintaining 4 projects at once, it's tough. So we really split responsibilities between each other, and we also have day jobs, so it's tough sometimes to keep up with the requests and the issues. And sometimes these features, they might have cross-project dependencies. For example, one example is the event streaming that allowed for more efficient VS Code extension use. And these releases have to be aligned. And for when you get a new request for an addition, for a new feature, ask those users, hey, please make an issue to keep track of those features. It's very important to keep track of the features, because those features that somebody asked for, somebody might have asked for already a year ago. And when you see that a lot of users are asking for that feature, you should consider whether that feature should be part of your tool or not. And what worked for us is that we maintainers and regular contributors are power users of Container Lab. So when there's an issue, when there's a missing feature, we feel the pain as well. We also found that Discord is a very, very good way of onboarding users for in the community. It's very easy to join, and of course, for your own projects, you should consider where your users are and go to those platforms. So if you're more privacy focused, Discord might not be a good fit. We also have extensive examples in the repository and the documentation for using the tool. It's a requirement if you add a new feature or a new kind, so network OS, then you have to add the documentation as well. And promoting your own community is very important because this gives the users and your contributors the little boost to go out there and, you know, talk about the tool and show off what they have done with it. And in fact, some of the folks watching the live stream might be here from the Discord because this was announced on the Discord, this little talk. And if you would like to contribute to a Container Lab or any other open source project, I would suggest you to first use the project, become a power user, because then you will see what is really a missing feature and what is not really a feature that should be there. And you will also get to see some of the issues that the tool has. Before you contribute a larger feature, look for low hanging fruit, because this gives you a view of how the project handles contributors, because open source sometimes doesn't mean it's really open access for everyone to develop. And finally, interact with the community and the developers, because your idea or issue that you run across might be already known in the community, and good projects to contribute to will be open for discussions, and they will help you help them. And finally, it's not a chore, so don't feel the pressure to do it. Have fun while you do it. As for the future of the Container Lab, we are open for contributions, and you can see some of the topics that we would love to get some help with. Feel free to take a look afterwards. And finally, you can find Container Lab's documentation on containerlab.dev, and we have this amazing Discord for both developers and users at containerlab.dev/discord. If we have any time for questions, I'm happy to take some.
Thank you so much. We can do one question, but very short.
Right. I've seen you. You use Discord for quick communications. Discord, of course, doesn't have a really good archiving system. When your users are on Discord and they have like very interesting questions or interesting problems, do you then port whatever the answer is to your documentation, or how do you deal with the lack of proper visibility there?
That's a good question. Thank you. So we like to keep the Discord organized. So if there's like a longer winding thread of questions, we like to create threads, which makes things more compact and more easily searchable within Discord. We have also tried to use this sort of solution that essentially joins our Discord and creates like this sort of wiki based on the contents of the Discord with some help from LLMs, but I'm honestly not so sure whether it's been a successful attempt at exposing the internal state of our Discord as like a documentation. But yes, we do take like these suggestions from Discord, for example, into GitHub issues or even into the documentation if something is unclearly documented.
All right, that's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very quick comment from Maximilian Emich. Shout out to Arista CEOs. It feels like it was made for Container Lab or vice versa.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing this, and also all the things that are involved in open source, of course, that go beyond just publishing the source and sharing what was so effective for you in building this project.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the Open Source Working Group for having me on.
Next, we will hear from Maria. Do we even need open source developers at all in the future? Can we just vibe code everything on the spot? Those are questions I hope to learn from Maria's talk, telling us how much of BERT is actually vibe coded.
Good morning. I think you are almost awake now, so I'd like to start with a show of hands. Who of you has ever seen an LLM output? That's nice. Okay, who of you has ever asked LLM for something? Who of you has ever asked an LLM to generate code? Who of you has asked LLM to generate code in C? And who of you has asked LLM to generate a code in C for lockless structures in multiple threads? Were you successful? Because I wasn't. It was completely futile. It totally hallucinated, and I ran out of tokens very quickly. Well, okay, this was the too long. Don't listen. And now the long talk. I am actually looking around, looking at neural networks and machine learning as a hobby for like 15, 16 years, something like that. It was induced by a university lecture about neural networks. I was trying quite hard with generating pictures, actually around 2014, 13, something like that. And I very quickly found out that it doesn't work. That you need a lot of tokens, but you need a lot of power. You need to harvest a lot of data to actually teach the network anything. And you cannot do it on your own hardware without having a gigantic, enormous data center. So I basically ran into a brick wall. Well, this is not a brick wall. This is the stop place of an abandoned railway. By the way, there's a mug on at the very end of that railway thing. I'll jump into the future. I was looking at things like stable diffusion. It started to look a little bit useful, but nothing really nice. In like 4 years ago, there was ChatGPT. I'm going to. This is an English abbreviation, but because we are at RIPE, which is a abbreviation of French words pronounced in English, I'm going to counterpoint this by saying ChatGPT. And I hope, pardon my French, it started to look funny, and we had a lot of creepy experience with those early versions. And after some time, people started to talk about what they achieved about AI. And they were like, well, it starts to be good. First, it was ridiculous, but it started to get there started to be people who basically became the LLM bros, the LinkedIn LLM bros, as I say. So we got quite fast into vibe coding, probably even before Anthropic made Cloud Code. And there were claims like making a web app or a mobile app. Well, there is the survivor bias. And this is the thing you don't see on LinkedIn. You don't see the failed stories. You see only the success stories, and only those flashy success stories. In 25, I've started seeing advanced coding agents. People started orchestrating things. People are actually using Copilot to help them coding. People run some fancy agents. I have seen lots of funny things being done by agents, some money sent to various places. And we got LLM assisted HR, which meant You can no longer just send a CV and hope that it's gonna be a person who would read it, which means we started getting different CVs because people started adapting. And we got LLMs who started blackmailing people. There was, I don't remember the exact project, but there was somebody who refused patches from LLM, and the LLM started to blackmail them. So I decided, let's try it. And after trying it, well, I encoded some web apps, and it quite worked. Quite. It was an easy web app. Well, I spent some time prompting, I spent some tokens. And several weeks later, I decided to make another app, but that app was a little bit more complex. And it started to look more like this than like a real house. It was started to look like things glued together. And I found out that I can use LLMs to actually glue libraries together somehow until it reaches some complexity. And when it reaches the complexity, there is a drop. And the drop is sudden. You go, it makes some working code, and suddenly, with just a little bit of added complexity, it drops, and you cannot make it do anything more. There is confirmation bias. I asked the LLM to do something. I saw the code, I saw the message because I required the LLM to write a commit message to describe what's done, to describe the code. And I expect the code to do what the commit declares. So I read the commit, I read the commit message, I read the diff, it looked okay, but I didn't check well. I didn't check as thoroughly as I would check if some of my people in my team would do. This is not in BERT, this was into my hobby projects. But the LLM is fast. It generates a lot of code, a lot of commits. And the tests do what you want. You run it, you look at it, it does what you want. No need to do code review. It just works. Why not to manage it? Well, this works with my hobby projects because I don't care whether it crashes or not. It runs on my laptop, and that laptop is just doing weird things anyway. And I'm still checking it for obvious problems like sending data to third parties. But it then starts to look like this. It just starts putting different things on each other without caring whether the previous feature is kept. And this is my biggest concerns. Are we going to get forks which are going to be claimed to be LLM fortified? Because I will refuse LLM assisted patches before actually accepting them. Before I would refuse the patches if they are crap. But if somebody looks at BERT, says, well, there is a bug, let's fix it, and let's just publish the fix. How are we going to stop the future where everybody is running their own fork with LLM edit fixes and then asking us to help? So I tried with BERT. I tried bug fixing BERT. I asked LLM to generate a bug fix for a very well-defined problem, And the problem was quite easy, and the solution was obvious on the first side. So it generated the solution. I came up first, and it added a misleading commit message, which meant I had to not only do my reasoning completely, I had to overcome the misleading commit message and find out that the LLM is wrong. Bug fixing BERT? Well, it didn't work, and this was a trivial fix. Because most of our bugs need complex thinking. It's not making code which is slow, it's thinking. And when I write code, it's faster than I am thinking. No, I have no idea how to use it. The fix had 10 lines. The fix had 10 lines, and I had to type a lot of more things just to persuade AI to do what I need. Okay, LLMs are good to in making text, aren't they? So I asked it to make text about BERT. But as soon as you dive into a little niche topic, you find out that the only person who has written anything about this in BERT was you. And the result, which is coming from Cloud Code, which is coming from ChatGPT, from anything, very creepily, eerily resembles what I have actually written. It just copies my own texts. It gave me nothing more. And if I asked about something which was never written, I just got a crap. No, nothing good. So I tried it. I gave it a set of commits. Well, give me release notes. And the release notes were again looking good on the first side. Then I found some problems and started fixing them. Then I found out that the problems are more deep, and then I ended up rewriting it completely. It took me more time. No thanks. So I asked for slides. The slides looked nice. Then I found out that there are subtle mistakes. Then I found out that the LLM is actually right, but in a different way. So I had to rewrite it again, and also I had to remove a lot of ad hominems. That didn't work as well. So I asked it to load my RFC database to do a review, what's relevant. And I'll shorten it. No. No result at all. So the lessons are our documentation sucks. And the topic is obnoxiously complex. The other lesson is I am more susceptible to confirmation bias than I thought. And we should be very much aware that confirmation bias is more of a problem than it looks like. If you don't think you are susceptible, you are. Click. I want to click. So, yeah, we do not wipe code BERT. It just leads nowhere. Or maybe there is somebody who's prompting way better than us. Please tell me. And there is also the LLM burnout, which is coming from push, from all the push. Yeah, I crashed out several weeks ago just because I couldn't bear it anymore. It was like LLM is giving us more work than we can do, and it takes time. It takes energy. Please don't send us crap. I wanna click. It does not But it tells you just one more prompt. This is the LinkedIn browse. Just one more prompt. We do not buy CodeBird.
Thank you. I'm sorry to say that we really do not have time for questions. Otherwise, we will overrun. We still have one more lightning talk.
Oh, sorry.
And otherwise, I have to bump that. So, yeah, unless you all want to stay here throughout the coffee break, but maybe not everyone wants to, but you'll be around. And thank you for these reflections on not just the LLMs, but also what it does to us and how we interact with this technology and our own technology as people. But we do still have one final lightning talk with Robert. I don't know if any of this tool is vibe coded. Netoscope, a network environment debugging tool.
Yes, hello, I'm Robert. Daytime, I'm employed by RIPE NCC. Disclaimer, this is a personal hobby project. This is not associated with the NCC. And I have 5 minutes, so let's do this. Some of you may have heard about the tool that was called Netalizer. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. It did good things. It was coded in Java, so some people liked it, some people didn't. It did good things in order to determine if there are local network problems right here, right now, when you want to get out to the internet, is everything working fine or not? But it's gone. It's gone for some time now, and that not everyone liked the fact that it's gone. But they tried to ask whether this can be open source, because at least we can still run it. And the people who made this, ICSI in Berkeley, they basically politely said, well, no, it's not going to happen. So that left a little bit of empty space. So taking one step back, what is the problem statement? So sometimes we try to connect to the internet and it just doesn't work. Something doesn't work. This could happen in a hotel, it could happen on a train, in a conference like this, at home. Something is just off. Maybe it completely doesn't work. Maybe some things don't work. And you really want to know what the problem is. Now, we kind of know what we're doing. We have a lot of tools in our hands, utilities on your Mac, on your laptop. You can run those tools and they will tell you something, but you kind of have to know what you're doing and how you start. You have to have a suspicion of what's going wrong and then use the tool to verify that. So the idea that I'm presenting now is that there could be a tool like Netalizer was that just does everything, tests everything, and then tells you what's wrong out of that. So some things work, some other things don't work. Netalizer had the side effect that they were also, with an opt-in fashion, they were also collecting these results, so they got a healthy dose of the network conditions from their users that were running the tool locally. So introducing Netoscope, starting at the very bottom. Naming is a hard problem, so sorry about that. It is what it is. It's a personal hobby project, started in 2020, a long time ago, but sometimes I spend energy on it, sometimes I don't. It's written in Go. I will not entertain questions about why is it not Rust. It is open source. Go there, check it out. The one thing that I like about it is that at the end of the day, it compiles down to a single binary. So just run it, and it does everything, including the GUI, which I will show. All right, so what it does today, if you run it, it discovers these things, whether the local network interfaces are defined. Do you have IPv4? Do you have IPv6? Whether your local DNS resolvers actually do what they are supposed to do. Can you ping them? Can you ask them for a DNS query? Then it tries to go out and talk to the public, some public open resolvers. Does the same thing. Try to resolve things and see if the expected answer is what's reasonable or not. Does the same thing for root servers, because why not? What I do like is the port filtering. Sometimes you are behind the firewall. You just don't know it. So it does a variety of TCP connections, and it sees whether they'll succeed or not. These are not real. They go against a test machine, and the test machine does not run the SSH, for example. It just says, hey, yes, you succeeded, great. It does an SSH host key check, so it can detect man in the middle, for example, and it will give you a warning if the key that you expect doesn't come back, and then various other things. And recently I added IPv6 PMTU checks, just because I had that problem somewhere and it was easy to add. But there could be a lot more tests, and I'm not going to list all of these, but you can imagine that anything you can do locally with a tool that you have at your hand can be built into such a thing, into such a tool. I've written it in such a way that it's actually modular, so it's possible to add the task. You need to write a module, and then the whole thing just becomes a part of the report. All right, and then one could write a summarizer that takes all of those tests and says, well, based on this, I can conclude that your real problem is this, and then give you a hint on how to fix that. It does have a CLI. Well, most of us like CLIs. So if you just run it, /nightscope, and then it spits out a couple of thousand lines of good things and bad things. And then there was someone who was asking, can you do a GUI? So I did. If you run it with, I don't know, -GUI, then your browser starts up and gives you basically the same controls. All right. There is no result submission at the moment. It just does whatever it does locally, and there is no collection of data of any kind on any server side. There is no summarizer. It would be nice to write one. Probably the biggest problem in terms of deployment is that there is no app. So you can't just go to the App Store and say, I want it, install it for me. So at the moment, it's a little bit of a barrier to install it. But I do supply binaries for Linux and macOS, so you can run with that. It's written in Go, so it should be easy to run it on Windows. But personally, I have no access to Windows, so I didn't even try to compile it. I'm pretty sure it would fail. So the reason why I'm here is not because I want you to use this tool. The reason why I'm here is because I've been doing this on and off, and honestly, it is time to maintain an open source project, as you all know. And I would really like to see if there's any interest in this, because based on the answers, I might just stop doing it or may put more energy into it. And I'm kind of on a fence on which one I should do. So that's the story. I don't think we will entertain questions, but I'm around in the break. And after that, if you want to talk about it, I'm here. Or you can just go there and try it out. That's it. That's my message. Thank you. Maybe we will entertain questions.
No questions.
Your decision.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. We have had a very full session, but thanks for presenting this tool. I will be trying it next time I run into strange issues. So that concludes our session. Thank you to all our speakers, our scribe, and other support staff. I've been asked to remind you that the deadline for the register to vote or attend in the RIPE-NC GM is 2 p.m. today. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure there's more interesting discussions you can have in the hallway with some of our speakers and joining us online or in person. And we will see you next time or on the mailing list.
We're almost ready to start. I'm just waiting for my co-chair to show up.
Okay, what time is it? 1. Oh, still people coming in the room. Is this on? Everyone? No.
Hello, 1, 2. Yeah, it's working.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Cooperation Working Group session this morning. Very warm welcome to you here in the room, as well as those joining us online. This morning, we will we'll have a lot of presentations about some critical topics like internet resilience, some issues about cybersecurity vulnerabilities, but also we're going to be having a discussion about recent EU regulatory changes or updates from a speaker from the last session. And over the next 90 minutes, we should have plenty of time for questions and answers. We are joined here today with my co-chairs, Achilles Kimos, who's there online, joining us from Brussels with European Commission, Yul Helsinkius, and I'm Desiree Milosevic. With that, we'd like to keep maybe 5 minutes for any admin stuff. You have seen the agenda online and all the presentations to see if there are any updates to the agenda.
So I'm taking over the admin side right now, and just we have to deal with the formalities. The notes of the previous meeting were published on the mailing list. We haven't seen any comments or amendments, so we hereby approve them. That's all the administrative things we have to take care of. But I would like to inform you that this will probably be my last meeting as a co-chair for this working group, because Achilles and I have been co-chairs of this working group for almost 10 years. That's not healthy. So I have volunteered to be the first one to step down. So we will actually issue a call for candidates and do a selection process on the mailing list after this meeting. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Right, shall we move on to the actual program?
Yes, we should. I'll let you do the.
Great, thank you. Yes, our first speaker is from Ukraine, and Ukraine has really become the laboratory for internet resilience. So I'm very happy to have Elisa Rohotska present on some of the regulatory problems caused by all of this. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session today. Today I'm going to talk about, previous slide. Yep. Today I'm going to talk about survival tools for internet resilience, or where does the policy step in, on the example of Ukraine. Policy is one of the tools that can change everything. Let's compare it to the hammer. If you use your hammer right, you will drive your nails in and fix the problem. Everything's great. If you use your hammer wrong, you might accidentally smash your finger, and that hurts, right? In fact, policy is the exact same hammer. It can enable things when used in the right way, and it can create additional problems when used in the wrong way. So today, I'm going to give you a glimpse of my perspective into how we should treat policy. But just before that, a short disclaimer. I'm a lawyer, not a technical expert, but still my professional capacity does not limit me from knowing what's going on in Ukraine. I live in Kyiv, the capital of the country, which is constantly shelled by rockets and drones almost daily. And I'm the end user who gets affected in some way, more or less. Still, for the last 2 years, I've been researching the concept of resilience and the influence of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine on internet service providers. So I have some of the perspectives I'm going to share with you today. So what do we have on the agenda today? First of all, we're going to talk about the telecom market in Ukraine, discuss its nature. Then we're going to look into how the Ukrainian law treats internet resilience, what was the timeline of changes, and how are we moving forward to the European Union, the implementation of the EU acquis. And the second part of the presentation would be about the issues that internet service providers are facing these days in Ukraine. So we'll critically evaluate them, assess them, and finally try to draw up some conclusions for ourselves. Here's the first slide. Let's talk about the market in Ukraine. So as any market, Ukrainian telecom market has two main players. Those are the individual entrepreneurs and the legal entities. I would like to draw your attention to the right side of the chart. You can see that as of Q2 2024, right, there were about 4,148 internet service providers in Ukraine. This number is kind of huge. We see there are lots of internet service providers in Ukraine, and maybe not every EU country can show the same statistics. But at the same time, it's not the most important number. The most important thing is the percentage distribution. We can see that 37% are legal entities and the rest, 63%, are left to individual entrepreneurs. We see the market is quite diversified. If you look a little bit below, you can see the total number of market participants in rural areas, which is kind of shocking as well, because we have 60% of the individual entrepreneurs working there. People like to help their communities. When the full-scale invasion started in 2022, Ukrainian internet endured not because of the pre-prepared state regulations, but thanks to its unique, diversified nature and decentralized nature. If you look into the left side of the chart, right at the bottom, you would see that in 2022, the number of internet service providers, especially the individual entrepreneurs, has skyrocketed. You might ask, why is that? The invasion started. Why do not people run away? In fact, people want to help their communities to stay connected, to have that internet connection, and to do everything we can to be part of that internet world. But the most important thing you should realize and remember from this exact slide is the fact that decentralization is a survival tool. There are many people in the market, many players who are mostly individual entrepreneurs who keep Ukraine connected in some way. And those are the exact people who saved the internet when the darkest hour came. Now moving on to the legislation. Ukraine is the country that has stress tested the concept of resilience. In 2022, when the full-scale invasion started, there was a quick response, the presidential decree that has urged the sector to adapt. But over the years, we understood it was not enough. It was just a general requirement. So there was an Order 424 issued in 2025, which has stated that providers of electronic communication networks and services shall immediately ensure the provision of electronic communication services in full compliance for at least 3 days. We see that the legislation has evolved into a strict and uncompromising engineering mandate with precise numbers. Let me explain. 72 hours of full support of the system is a mandatory requirement. So 100% of the core network has to be available when there are, for example, blackouts. At the same time, it's not just about the equipment that needs to be provided, it's also about the full cycle of life support. We see the problem with logistics, for example, because it's not just the equipment, we'll get to that, but still, it's also about the people who would bring the equipment, who would bring fuel, for example, and who would keep the system running. But at the same time, about the equipment, it's kind of expensive these days, let's be honest. Ukrainian market is known for having one of the lowest tariffs on internet services in the world. In this way, we have lots of providers who do not gain enough profit for that, but at the same time, they need to provide the network with some alternative sources of power. So this creates a situation where there is a financial burden in some way, and the state does not really help because from 2020, Ukraine has restored the VAT and duties on energy equipment. So in this way, the financial burden is quite heavy. Let's see the bigger picture. So the timeline of changes. I've just explained the light green one, the Order 424, which was a specific one, but let's move a little bit backwards and discuss what was going on earlier. So just before the full-scale invasion, still in 2017, we had the cybersecurity law. And then in 2022, it was supplemented by the law on electronic communications. So all of that was kind of peaceful and high-level framework, but when February 22 came, all our resources went into physical survival. So ISPs were splicing cables under fire, they were buying batteries, and this later was backed up by the Presidential Decree 802. In this sense, the state's response was manual and in some way crisis response mode, which was activated through different bodies in Ukraine. So we see that in 2025, we got the specific rules, not just the general requirements to adopt, but the specific operational rules like 100% of core network has to be available and specific time frame, 72 hours. What we are noticing here is the contrast because In 2022, the provider who had barely survived artillery strikes and blackouts now is suddenly required by law to build a full-cycle cyber compliance system. In fact, we're asking war engineers to become overnight experts in bureaucracy. And here I turn to the NIS2 directive, where in October 2025, Ukrainian government has passed a law to update the previous cybersecurity law, where we implement the requirements of NIS2. In fact, providers would need to choose between splicing the cables with drones flying over their heads and at the same time writing reports and notifying the authorities. That's a question of priorities, actually. Second part of my presentation is about the issues that ISPs are facing these days. So in September, October 2024, the State Tax Service of Ukraine began to abolish the simplified taxation system for small business providers of fixed internet access. And it was like a target for specifically those providers of internet, the small ones, which cannot be explained in any way. There is a tax pressure, and actually there is 2 days ago, one of the bodies in Ukraine, an independent one, has issued a report stating that our national regulator wants to impose even more taxes, like 1.5% of the turnover of the provider. This would be the tax for operators and, well, providers. We'll see where we'll go with that, but as to abolishing the simplified taxation system, we have an information that right after that happened, 500 of internet service providers have ceased operations right after this abolishment. So you can remember the numbers, you can do the math. There were 4,148 and 500 ceased operations right after changing the law. We can see where it leads us, actually. The second part of that is the mobilization issue. We have a human factor in that. So it's obvious that when there is war in the country needs to mobilize people to have someone to fight. And this is reasonable. But what is unreasonable is the fact not all of these people need to do that. For example, the telecom providers. As it happens, most people in telecom in Ukraine are men. You can see that from this auditorium. But still, those men have the obligation to protect their country. And as far as we remember, the market players are divided into 2 huge groups. So individual entrepreneurs and legal entities. We have more individual entrepreneurs, than the legal entities. But at the same time, legal entities have the right to reserve 50% of their staff not to go to war. And on the other side, we have individual entrepreneurs who do not have that right at all. For them, those 60%, 63% of market players, there is a problem because there might be nobody to fix the cables, nobody to help restore connection. And for them to have that right to reserve their workers, they need to change legal nature of what they are doing. They need to become legal entities, but that's not end of the road. They need to file reports, of course. They need to do appropriate audits. But at the same time, they need to become recognized as the critical infrastructure object. And that is the problem, because it takes up to 6 months approximately. And at the same time, one of the requirements to become recognized as a critical infrastructure object is to provide a sufficient level of salary. So you see the finance again. We have low tariffs, we need to buy expensive equipment, and at the same time, we need to provide salaries to people. So in some way, Ukrainian internet service providers are stuck between all of those problems. So we see the brain drain of the exact engineers who needed to perform emergency cable splicing under fire. So we come to the most important question. Can we strike a balance? What is more important for us, critical infrastructure or human resources? Most of us would say, of course, both. Both are important. But how can we balance? The thing is, the forced disappearance of small providers due to tax changes and mobilization does not change the market. In fact, it directly reduces the physical resilience of the entire network. And when you eliminate small players, you centralize infrastructure and you turn a highly resilient network back into fragile and vulnerable target. I would like to share a quote from one of the interviews. This is the quote from the interviews conducted by the very first NOGUA meeting in 2024, where a question was posed. If there's no help from the government, donors, or volunteers, how long will it take the internet service provider for his work to stop? And internet service provider from Kherson region, which is now partially occupied and which has been partially occupied during asking that question, has answered. We'll keep going and enduring. We've invested a lot in our work, so it would be really painful to lose it. Others will help us. You can see the mentality, right? This is a small internet service provider from partially occupied region, and all of them want to help their communities. They do not want to leave the territory. But at the same time, they rely on others. And others does not just mean other players in the market who can, for example, borrow the equipment. Others means everybody in this room, actually, every one of us, because, for example, the policymakers can make a change in that sense, because we can make a difference in how the work of the internet service provider is conducted each day. We can influence, for example, the taxes, the new regulations, the implementation of, for example, European legislation. So in this sense, others are the drivers of the telecom economy. I would like to finalize with the conclusions. So my message here is that the European experience should be adapted to Ukrainian realities. We cannot demand cyber resilience from players we are kind of depriving of financial resilience. We should protect decentralization. In case of Ukraine, it's only the decentralization that can hold the market together, hold the communities together, but because those were the exact people, the internet service providers in frontline territories, the small providers who helped stay people connected. And in terms of EU legislation, we cannot just copy and paste the directives, but we must adapt it to our Ukrainian realities. So the final conclusion would be to support small and medium-sized enterprises' survival by tools available. And you should understand that those tools can differ from country to country. Different countries have different problems, of course, it's obvious. But still, the experience from Ukraine can be applied in each country, not just in war-related stuff, but also for natural disasters. Here's the QR code you can scan to see the article, Ukraine is a Laboratory of Internet Resilience. Me and my colleague Solomia Ramenko are authors of this article on RIPE Labs, where we were trying to show the theoretical approach to the concept of internet resilience from different dimensions, but also we have analyzed how internet service providers in Ukraine have saved the internet and which tools were available to them, as well as there's a critical analysis of the decentralization. So on this note, I would like to thank everybody who's joined here today, and as they say in a great initiative, let's keep Ukraine connected.
stay here for questions. Thank you. And based on experiences from some previous meetings, we have tried to leave some time for actual questions and answers this time. So we actually have 5 minutes now for Q&A. So if you have any questions, there's a microphone back there, and Desiree has a roaming microphone as well. So of course, as soon as we reserve time for questions and answers, there won't be any.
Of course, there would be. Hi. Apologies. First of all, thank you very much for this presentation and also for raising this topic. My name is Natalie. I represent a company which is called Threaten. It's an international company, but we have a significant network in Ukraine. And I just wanted to say and compliment your presentation with the fact that Ukraine did show an incredible example of showing what is a resilient network and how you stand up for what is right and keep Ukraine and other countries, because there is so much traffic crossing Ukraine, right, connected. And that project that you've mentioned, Keep Ukraine Connected, I would like to remind everyone that it actually helped a lot of providers and is still working actively. So if you have any equipment donated, please check the website. There are always requirements for additional donations, and I'm sure a lot of operators will be very thankful for helping them out. Thank you again.
Thank you for your support.
Alistair Woodman, representing a couple of open source projects. I've been writing things to the European Commission for the last 3 years related to regulation. And there's a sort of nuanced thing going on, right? On the one side, companies are trying to avoid being regulated, and I sort of understand that. Simultaneously, it's become relatively obvious in the last 6 months that the AIs are getting so dangerous that the regulations somehow are not probably as good as they need to be. So part of the problem that I think you're pointing to is that the regulators are used to living in a 5-year, 10-year time frame for doing things, and we now live in an exponential time where they don't have that time, and we as humans don't have that time. So a good critique of European legislation at the moment is they keep writing in carve-outs for the bureaucracy so that the laws only apply to companies and not the bureaucracy. But the malcontent AIs don't care what they take down and what they lock up. So there's a whole bunch of things that need to get fixed, but not regulating is not the answer to this either. So I think a very healthy discussion about what to do would be a good idea. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can just reflect a little bit, because I agree that not regulating is not like the issue that we can resort to, but at the same time, if we take into account the context countries are living these days, maybe we might find the consensus in that place.
Hi, Sander Stefan, Global Alliance, Keep Ukraine Connected initiative. If there's anything we can do besides what we're already doing, please find me in the hallway. I'm here all week.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. With that. So I hope our next speakers are in the room. It's a great pleasure to continue with the new, younger generation of cooperation working group speakers. No pun intended. Your slides are already up. And yes, so it's a pleasure to introduce Martin Price and Edward from the University of Lancaster, who will be speaking about attack surface vulnerabilities. I also recommend that people read Cory Doctorow's book, Attack Surface, for some fun. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, that's forward.
So hi everyone, thank you very much for the invite to speak. I'm Abid Austin, this is my colleague Martin Price, and we're here to talk to you today about some of our work with some of the UK government, looking at shared points of vulnerabilities and failures, how they overlap between different organisations, and why for national level policymakers that's important and of interest. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm actually a mathematician by background, but I'm in recovery now. I'm no longer in darkened rooms just doing maths all the time. I like to do computer science. And my colleague Martin.
Hello everyone. I should have chose a picture where I'm smiling, I think.
This is what it does to you.
Anyway, I'm a second year PhD. My background is in cyber. And some of the work we're presenting today has been built upon some work I published last year and some work me and Ed did with the NCSC.
Brilliant. So just to sort of set the scene a little bit, in a lot of cases, traditionally, an organisation will map its own attack surface to identify and mitigate its own vulnerabilities. But actually, government-level analysts, increasingly so perhaps with the rise of machine speed threats from AI, are interested in the sort of risks that affect their cyber estate at scale. And so rather than knowing where one vulnerability sits in one place, they'd like to know where one or two vulnerabilities, or indeed many, sit in many places, perhaps in a sector or across critical national infrastructure or in an area of significant economic interest. One approach to achieve this that we've been looking at over the last 18 months is to use external attack surface mapping tools, things like Shodan, Census, Zoom-I. And actually, one of the values of this from a research perspective, just as an aside, has been that we don't have to go around pinging other people's IP addresses, which can be a problem. So perhaps the partners we work with have the luxury of being able to do that, but we do not. And so we're not suggesting at any point these tools give analysts as thorough an understanding as you get internally. We're not suggesting you would replace your defence strategy with Shodan. But what we are suggesting is that this can allow you, through some of the scaling tools that Martin developed, to look at a broader picture view. If you knew about, and obviously if you're a government regulator, you often do, 100 organisations in a particular critical national infrastructure sector, and you wanted to know, was there a particular exposed risk that they share, this might be a lens through which you could gather at least some of that information. And perhaps we don't suggest it's perfect information gathering, but what we are saying is that some picture is in a lot of cases better than no picture. Just because you might not see every vulnerability doesn't mean you shouldn't look for at least one. I think one of the key questions is what are the most widespread vulnerabilities, but also it's been developing tooling that does a bit of, I suppose this is where the mathematician in me is going to fall out, I'm really sorry, but this is where perhaps some of the clustering can be adapted and tweaked so that you can see clusters of vulnerabilities and the organisations that affect them. Now, in some cases, these clusters of vulnerabilities are obvious because they affect a shared service or a shared piece of software, and so you will have multiple CVEs because you use that one. But in others, actually, they are a way of profiling tech stacks that are used across these organisations or suppliers that supply in not flawed, but equipment that contain out-of-the-box vulnerabilities that could be exploited, and that permeates its way through across a broader picture, i.e. your sector or your area of significant economic interest. And so this is some novel tooling that we've developed that it will be in a paper and it'll be open source very soon, but I think is interesting, sort of identifying vulnerabilities at scale. What decision makers really wanted, though, and this is no criticism of them in any way, is they wanted to visualize it. They wanted to see the pictures. These are some quite trivial pictures. But the point is when you often do attack surface mapping at this kind of scale, you get terabytes of nonsense log data you don't really need. And this is at the very least going to slow down analysts. And yeah, you can feed it into AI, but what we're trying to do here is slightly more explainable. So the aggregations and the visualizations that this tool is giving is letting you see deterministically and without just feeding it into a box, sort of shared risks or shared metrics or measurements that let you visualize and see where risks are at scale. Whilst I've talked a lot about it from a critical national infrastructure point of view, that perhaps is the obvious way in which UK government partners want to try and feed into protecting the nation, right? If you've got a vulnerability in all your nuclear power plants, this would be a bad thing you would want to fix, at an IT level in this case. One of the other things that they're really interested in, and I say this is an emerging sort of thread over the last 12 months in particular, is that it's this place that they think that regulators and government cyber bodies need to play in providing support for SMEs. Over the last 5 years or 10 years, you might say, the world has become very, very digital. And now very small businesses are digitized in their infrastructure and operations to the extent that they are a valid cyber target, and it would have a disruption effect on them to do so. But they perhaps lack that knowledge to even realize that there's a problem or they need to worry about it. You don't expect a lot of very small businesses to have a cyber strategy, but perhaps nowadays the suggestion is they need one. And this is where the NCSC want to play a critical role, and that's fair to say, is that they want to be identifying vulnerabilities that affect large swathes of organisations in certain areas of the UK. And this is true also for local government authorities who'd want to see it across their region. So not themed by organisations that are, I suppose, in a shared sector, but themed by in a shared region. And they want to identify key or common or widespread vulnerabilities or exploits that they can put out guidance and policy for to try and encourage remediation. What I think is really interesting, the last speaker talked about it as a bit of a hammer, and I thought it was a fantastic way of phrasing it, is what there's a gap and a minute between, and this is again something I think that they'd like to close perhaps, but it's trickier to do, is moving from reactive advice and guidance, so saying, dear SMEs, did you know there's a new CVE and you need to do this patch, to actually using it to shape harder regulation or legislation. It's something that UK government partners want to address. And I imagine partners around the world probably want to address. But actually what they're finding is legislation is going to be needed because there's often insufficient incentive for effective organisations to necessarily patch some of these vulnerabilities. It's too big a job for them to do it. They know the CVE is there, but individually they're like, well, yeah, I'm not taking all my system offline. I'm not stopping selling products for a few days. I'm not fixing it. And they don't get that perspective that this tooling gives you, that that's a problem that affects that entire retail industry in that area. And so perhaps what has been identified through this, although it is a slow process, and a questioner mentioned how that thought process about timeframes might need to change, which I thought was really interesting. But what's been identified through this is that providing that big picture view isn't always something that individual orgs care about when they read the advice. And so perhaps this is becoming a tool that will shape legislation to try and enforce that good cyber hygiene across sectors, because individual orgs, when provided advice on their own, didn't necessarily care. One question that they come back with, though, in passing this, is actually, do we fully understand the link between widespread vulnerabilities and that data science picture, and sort of how that affects shared dependencies or structure within different sectors? What's the actual evidence to suggest this is a real problem? And perhaps that's something Martin's research has been trying its very best to answer. So I'll hand over to Martin now.
Thank you.
Green. Big green one.
Oh, yes. So far we've been talking about an attack surface as this abstract concept. And what we really wanted to do was show you what sort of data you can get from these tools. And as Ed mentioned, seeing this at scale is of interest. So what we've done is we've created an attack surface for the English government. I'm not going to bore you with the technical details of how we did that, but essentially we combined some open source information with the tools we get from Shodan to create small attack surfaces for each local government authority and central government departments, and combine them together to create a comprehensive picture. So this is, as you can tell, is a map of England. Specifically, it's broken down into each local authority district. That is essentially the lowest mandatory form of government. And they represent stuff like cities or urban areas or larger rural areas. And this is telling us the IP addresses each of those local authorities use, how many they use. Now, perhaps this map isn't too interesting from a regulatory point of view, but because we have IP addresses, we can also get the vulnerabilities. So this is a map of all the local authorities that share the same vulnerability. And what you might notice is that there is hotspots, geographical regions all sharing the same vulnerability. And this raises some questions around cyber resilience and cybersecurity, because an attacker, if they wanted to target these specific authorities, they can reuse the same exploit, reducing their workload and making it easier for them. Now, the exact reason they're all vulnerable is a bit unclear. One possible reason could be that they share the same hosting provider. Now, following that thread, we get maps like this. So this is highlighting all the authorities that share a specific hosting provider. And this really does raise some cyber resilience questions, because now we've gone from having to attack 5 or 6 separate authorities to just focusing on the single dependency, the single hosting provider that supplies all of them. Now, note that these 2 hosting providers are not from the traditional cloud. They're not part of the big 3, Amazon, Microsoft, or Google. And that's because if it was, these maps would be a lot more blue. So this is just a basic bar chart telling us what cloud providers are used throughout our English dataset. As we can see, there is a heavy reliance on Amazon, especially for central government, where 50% of the departments we manage to map use AWS, and specifically London. Now, there are some which diversify a bit more and use Azure or Oracle or any of them, but again, the majority is Amazon, and this raises a serious cyber resiliency question. What happens if Amazon goes down? Now, this isn't conjecture, because was it in October last year? Amazon suffered an outage and most of their, or a majority of users, couldn't use their Amazon services. Does that mean central government, half of central government, were unable to do their jobs? Alongside this English use case, we also have a more corporate use case, because we were told it'd be interesting to see how we compare to the EU, especially post-Brexit. And so we generated 2 attack surfaces, one for a UK company, one for an EU company, both within the Fortune 500, both within the same sector, and so they're pretty comparable companies. And what we get is this quite busy graph. But once you understand how to read it, it's actually quite telling. So each of these dots represent either an organization and an entity within it, so for example, a subsidiary, or it represents a cloud. So the red and blue dots are the organizations, so that's the UK and the EU in red, UK in blue, and the clouds are in yellow. And what we'll initially see, if we just read from left to right, is that the UK, like with the government, has a favoritism for Amazon. Most of the entities within that organization will use solely Amazon or a mix of Amazon and something else. It's rare to see solely Azure or solely Google. The EU, on the other hand, prefer a mix. Though you see that mass in the middle, that's where they use multiple, and you'll see there's quite a few red dots there. But there's also quite a few red dots that will use just Amazon or just Azure. Which is just, but in the next few years, we can expect this graph to change quite drastically, as the EU are about to introduce the EU Cloud Act. So if you haven't noticed, the majority of these clouds here are American. And the EU Cloud Act is specifically trying to remove that American influence on Europe and use more homegrown cloud providers. Whereas the UK doesn't have such an act in place. So just to sort of recap, local areas all suffer from shared vulnerabilities, possibly because of their hosting providers. This reduces the effort required by an attacker to attack these authorities. There is a large reliance on Amazon, both for the private companies and for the government. I've said here it can be used for an indirect attack, but in reality, I should be saying this raises concerns, because if Amazon goes down. And there is cyber resilience questions. I'll merge these last 2 points. There is cyber resilience questions around our reliance on American cloud infrastructure. America has the US Cloud Act, where they can access any data stored by an American cloud provider, regardless of where that data physically is. So if central government is storing something, some crucial or confidential data on Amazon, the American government can also access that, even if it's stored in the UK. Europe seems to be pushing back against this, and this makes sense. They're quite privacy aware over there. Whereas post-Brexit, we've started to sail the other way and we've become more aligned with America. I'm not in the position to say, is that the right choice? But it's something to be aware of. Thank you.
Jim Reid has no affiliations, speaking solely for myself. This is interesting work, and there's a lot more depth to this. I think you could be very, very busy for a long, long time.
Yes.
But one thing that struck me when you're talking about that, you seem to be talking about vulnerabilities in a sense in the abstract.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it'd be better to try and do a little bit of triage on that, because some, for example, the online services provided by a local authority, some of them are much more important than others. And I wonder maybe it's better to focus on the ones that really matter as the first point of contact and leave the stuff further down the tree until later on. I mean, for example, nobody really cares if a local authority's library goes offline for a while. It's a different story for processing benefits or doing social care. And I wonder maybe it's better to try and look at the analysis. Again, it's going to be a very hard job because you've already got far too much to do as it is. But trying to ask a local authority to come back to you and say, hey, what are your most important services and what platforms are you using for them? That would be a very, very difficult exercise in itself. But I think that exercise would be valuable if it could be carried out.
That's a very good point. Some of the work we're looking at is, how can we prioritize vulnerabilities? Now, from our point of view, it's basically been taking that technical view. But I mean, you raise a very good point. Like a care service going down is much more important than the website of a library.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you.
Cheers.
Hisham Ibrahim from IPNCC. In one of the early slides, you geolocated the IP addresses to different locations. I was just curious of how you did so.
Okay, so the
Which one do you want to use? Don't let me tell you.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So perhaps it's a bit of trickery of presenting it. These aren't where the IPs are physically located. This is simply saying this local authority uses these IP addresses, but they could be physically located anywhere.
Thank you.
Hello, Vladislav Oropian from the Global AI Foundation. I wanted to add that clouds and hosting providers is not the only factor for the government services. For example, a couple of weeks ago in Germany, we saw the German national TLD.de going down because German register, the DNIC, published incorrect DNSSEC records. And even if all your clouds and hosting providers are working perfectly, it doesn't help if your national TLD is unavailable. So this is also a factor to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good point.
Hello, this is Ulrich from ICANN. You pointed out that the over-reliance on one of those cloud providers is a vulnerability, maybe. And I just want to say, well, yeah, right, if in that case Amazon would go down, a lot of government service disappear. But would it really be advantageous to have 30 different services and then another one every week? And so one agency is offline every week, and that's I don't see really that you're making it better by just going to more service providers. So yeah, well, I don't totally agree with the saying that it's a vulnerability just because you only use one provider.
I think it was important to be that we're aware of it, but thankfully it's above my pay grade to decide the solution.
Do we have any online questions?
No online questions.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mike Blanche, and he will give us an update on Digital Network Act, which is something that will affect all of us, I'm afraid.
This works. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see everybody. You might remember if you were in Bucharest, I presented on what might be in the Digital Networks Act, the European Union's new update to telecoms regulation. Well, they've published the draft, and so I can tell you what's actually in it. And there's some things that you might want to do about it as well. So let's get started. Just to introduce myself, I'm a consultant. I used to work for Google for 14 years. I've also been on the board at the London Internet Exchange. I now work for a variety of different clients in the kind of technology policy space for internet infrastructure, but anything I say here is definitely my own views, nothing of that of any of my clients, so you can blame me for everything here. So very quickly, a rapid recap. What is the Digital Networks Act? How has it come about? It's the biggest rewrite of European telecoms regulation in a decade. It was the baby and the brainchild of Thierry Breton here, who was the previous European Commissioner for all things digital. He used to be CEO of France Telecom as well back in the day. A lot of the things in the Digital Networks Act, as we'll talk about, seem to be the result of large telecoms operators that have lobbied the European Commission for a number of years for a sort of new industrial policy to allow telcos in Europe to consolidate, to become bigger, to have looser merger controls, to build European telecoms operators into technology champions that can compete with US and Chinese technology firms. This idea of regulating up technology companies and regulating down telcos was also a key feature of what telecoms operators were lobbying for. And then there's been a whole debate around what's variously called network fees, fair share, etc. for IP interconnection, which I know has been presented here before. So for more of the history, you can watch the video of my last talk at the last RIPE meeting. But here is the Digital Networks Act. It was released in January. It's 300 odd pages, 416 recitals, 210 articles. I've read it, so you don't have to. Then the next 12 slides will hopefully explain the bits that are probably the most important and concerning for the internet community. And I've got 17 minutes to do it. So eyes down, let's go. Key issues. There's a lot in there about scope. Who should be included? And as you'll see, the Digital Networks Act proposes broadening telecoms regulation to cover what they call an extended connectivity ecosystem. There's more about ecosystems when it comes to cooperation and what is called a voluntary conciliation mechanism, which will be regulators producing guidelines and monitoring compliance of technical and business relationships between this broader ecosystem. Level playing field and convergence terms are in there about bringing telecoms, cloud, and content services all under a single regulatory framework. It incorporates the open internet regulation, which was hard fought for 10 years ago, and it has new provisions for IP interconnection and new regulations there. Those are the bits that we need to talk about. There's a bunch of other stuff in there that's more about telecoms infrastructure to do with spectrum policy reform, switching off copper networks to try to get everyone onto fiber to the home, single passport authorization, and also infrastructure security and resilience, things to do with submarine cables and so on as well, which I won't cover because that's less of an issue. So the first thing, and the next slides are going to have sections from the draft act in the boxes, and we can talk about each one of those in turn. The justification of why are they doing this? The connectivity sector is apparently undergoing significant technological changes. Digital infrastructures are becoming cloud and AI based, and the connectivity ecosystem is broadening to provide new innovative services. So we need to take account of the evolution from electronic communication networks towards digital networks. Well, unfortunately, none of the terms in bold are defined, and they're all quite vague. So the boundaries between what is in the DNA and what is not is also very vague, and that's perhaps intentional. What is the difference between an electronic communications network and a digital network? I don't know. Are there any analog networks left? Maybe the PSTN bits of it, like the old telephone, like when you make a phone call, but even a lot of that's moved to digital, right? So it's confusing. What's the objective? What are they trying to achieve? Well, this is one of the objectives stated: reinforcing the competitiveness of the connectivity sector, cloud and AI solutions, innovative services, quality assured and reliable services, and also this facilitating cooperation among players in the broader digital ecosystem, which is like, what does that mean? There's a lot of unclear terms here as well. Competitiveness, are they talking about competitiveness within telecoms operate, between telecoms operators? Are they talking about competitiveness of telecoms operators against other people in the broader digital ecosystem? Cloud and AI based, do they mean using cloud and AI in telecoms networks, like to help run them? Or do they mean that telecoms operators should become cloud and AI providers? This isn't clear. Innovative services, that's not clear. Well, that could be anything. And personally, I would think that regulation doesn't always result in innovation, but there we go. Quality assured and reliable services has been a euphemism for potential dilution of open internet provisions. If something is quality assured and reliable, it may not be running over the best efforts internet. And facilitating cooperation, doesn't necessarily support the objectives of some of the faster, better networks discussed elsewhere in the Act, but it's there anyway. The level playing field gets a mention. This is a lobbying term that big telcos have been talking about for more than a decade, and how telecoms operators think it's unfair that someone running a telecoms operator and building network is regulated differently to someone running a website or an app or a cloud service. You can watch my previous presentation for how I talk more about that. It's not really a level playing field. These people are playing different sports anyway, but the DNA seeks to level that false equivalence, unfortunately. So who's in scope? General authorization. Anyone, any network involved in the delivery of publicly available digital services. Well, unfortunately, digital services are not defined, but later we have networks used wholly or mainly for the purposes of providing electronic communication services or information society services available to the public. So information society services are defined, not in this, but under the e-commerce directive, and I think the Digital Services Act now, information society services are any online or digital content, application or service. So if your network is now wholly or mainly used for providing any digital or online content or service available to the public, you are now going to be in scope of what's called general authorization. Now this is previously only applied to telecoms operators selling services to the public, and it has a bunch of responsibilities around making sure you can interconnect with other providers, you can provide emergency calling if necessary, you can have, there's provisions around consumer protection, contract requirements, transparency, complaints handling, Number portability, paying regulators. There's administrative fees to pay for the regulator and other stuff as well. So any network used to provide any digital service is apparently now going to be in scope of general authorization. So I went and had a look at the DKIC's membership list, and I just started at A, and I looked at a whole bunch of networks that are not telecoms operators, but who under this definition would probably be in scope. Activision, gaming provider, Alliance, insurance company, I think they have services they offer to the public. Amadeus, that's the airline booking system, I think they have services available to the public. Acronis, cloud backup, ARD, TV provider, Arista, I guess they've got a website with firmwares and so on, and Axera, chip manufacturer. None of these are telecoms providers, and they only got as far as A, but why are all these going to be in scope potentially of general authorization? A private network currently that doesn't sell services to the public only has a very small number of obligations under the current telecoms regulations in Europe. Under the DNA, these obligations are going to increase significantly. It doesn't stop there. This concept of ecosystem cooperation increases the scope further, and there's a lot of text here, but it's about regulators producing guidelines about how networks and other people in the, what do they call it, the electronic communications or closely related sectors, how they'll cooperate on technical and commercial matters. Who are these other undertakings? Well, that's somewhere else in the text, but here we go. Content providers, software and AI developers, as well as network equipment and device manufacturers. So vendors, software developers, equipment manufacturers, yes, there's telecoms regulators now writing guidelines about how you interact with telecoms operators on technical and commercial matters, such that services are provided and products support the efficient, economically sustainable and reliable delivery of services, and how to develop innovative services and so on. What is this all about? I mean, if I'm reading this wrong, I would really appreciate a discussion with someone explaining how it's all wrong, but it's written here. And it's not just guidelines. It says that the regulators have to ensure that cooperation is consistent with the guidelines. So does this mean telecoms regulators are going to be roaming the halls at the next RIPE meeting or Mobile World Congress, making sure that an equipment vendor and a telco are having the right sort of conversations? Really? I don't know, that's what it says. If you have a dispute, there's now this new process proposed called voluntary conciliation, where if between a telecoms operator and another one of these people in the ecosystem, there's a dispute, you can now go to a telecoms regulator and provide a structured and neutral forum to facilitate dialogue on the technical and commercial arrangements of what you are doing with the telecoms operator. This seems like dispute creation, not dispute resolution. And there are some, and although it says this is voluntary, there's a bunch of people that think it should be mandatory and binding. And how is it going to look, even if it is voluntary, how is it going to look if you don't turn up to this voluntary thing? It's not going to look good, right? Quick aside on net neutrality. Normally, like, we'd have whole presentations on net neutrality and so on, but that I'm not even sure this is the worst bit. So currently, there's this separate open internet regulation that protects net neutrality in Europe. The DNA kind of swallows that and incorporates it, but not all of it, only some of it. And in particular, it misses almost all the recitals of the open internet regulation, which provide valuable context as to how it should be interpreted. And in addition, the European Commission is proposing that it should be empowered to issue what it calls implementing acts, which is like additional stuff about how to offer specialized services, network slicing, things that it calls services other than internet access, which is a risk of having fast lanes and differentiated services. Let's talk about IP interconnection finally in particular. And this seems to be a particular focus of the Digital Networks Act and of the Commission at this time. So it proposes that it's necessary to foster cooperation among people involved in the end-to-end service delivery regarding efficient management of data traffic. What does this mean? Well, elsewhere it says traffic is handed over to providers of public electronic communication services in the form of peering or transit. Apparently, increasingly, I think that's the only way of doing it, right, other than CDNs. Apparently, in certain cases, such traffic may give rise to a disproportionate or unsustainable investment need for the receiving provider. So if you buy a transit service and your customers are using the internet too much, and that's causing too much traffic to come in on your transit, apparently, and that's breaking your business model, apparently that's now your transit provider's problem. That's not really right, right? The internet is a request-response mechanism. Users ask for stuff, content providers respond with what's being requested. If that causes an unsustainable investment burden for the ISP, which the users are on, then the ISP's business model is not really the peer's problem, right? This proposal would make networks liable for the investment needs or economic business model of the third-party networks that they interconnect with. But there's more. Right, where do we start here? Where do we even start here? Anytime I see the F word, and that's fair, I sigh, because what is fair, what is reasonable, what is proportionate use of the resources of the other party, what is efficient, economically sustainable, or reliable for that matter. These are all subjective terms. None of it is clear. And this reference to setting up service level agreements for peering and transit, certainly when I used to work in doing IP interconnect, absolutely all the peering we did had absolutely no service level agreement at all. It was all my network's my network, your network's your network, and we're not liable for each other, right? We just want to interconnect and make the internet better. So the European Commission appears to consider interconnection a service provided by big telecoms operators. They don't seem to understand how it works. And then finally, and this is perhaps the most pernicious term, as well as traffic exchange should not lead to disproportionate or economically unsustainable investment needs, the benefits arising from increased traffic should be shared in a manner conducive to continued investment, innovation, and network resilience. You have to share the benefits of traffic. And again, it doesn't explain what this is or how it will work, but that's not how you're responsible for your traffic. Other networks responsible for their traffic. You might interconnect in some way, shape, or form, but there's not benefit sharing. That's not how it works. This seems to be the potential hook for what was called network fees, perhaps not regulated network fees, but sort of coerced network fees. Well, you have to share the benefits with me. And if you don't share the benefits, then, well, I'm going to go to the regulator and we're going to have this voluntary conciliation service. Anyway, so if the last 12 slides confused you, here it is all in one table. The stuff in green is who is currently regulated by European telecoms regulation, public electronic communication service providers. All the stuff in red are all the new people who'd be regulated. Other industries, if you operate public websites or apps or services, you'll now be in scope of general authorization and this IP interconnection, benefit sharing, cloud services, AI services, CDNs, software developers, hardware vendors. My goodness, this is a long list. Is this really the intention of the DNA? It appears it is, sadly. So what happens now and what can you do about it? And I have a minute to tell you this. Well, some countries are not very happy with this. Some regulators are also not particularly happy with this. BEREC, which is the Association of Telecoms Regulators, they wrote a whole paper called Europe's Telecom Reality Check, which was sort of pushing back on some of the narrative of some of the big telecoms operators in Europe. They've also provided an early assessment of the Digital Networks Act, where they say things like some provisions add complexity, don't add value, and don't help reach the aim of regulatory simplicity and predictability. For telecoms, for regulators who normally don't say things very kind of calmly, this is quite strong words. Many industry stakeholders are concerned as well, but is Brussels listening? So what can you do? There is a consultation open to the European Commission, closes in about a month's time. The EC link is there. I created a tiny URL you can have, so make it easier to find. There's a QR code as well. These are all the concerns. I won't read them through again because we've talked about them all already. The slides are online as well, so you can go and have a look if you agree, or you can send your own feedback if you don't agree. What else can you do? Please get involved, respond to these consultations, engage with your trade associations, who will be well placed to provide feedback to the European Commission as well. So if you're a member of an Internet Service Provider Association or EuroIX or so on, please encourage them to contribute and get involved in Brussels. I understand the Internet Society is working on an open letter to send to the European Commission. Carl at BISOP would be happy to hear from you if you want to be part of that. Please engage if your organization has a regulatory and policy team, please highlight the risks to them and keep updated on future consultations. And if you're in the EU, and I appreciate we're in the UK at the moment, which is not, you can also provide feedback to your MEPs who will have a say in this, to your national regulators who will be providing input to BEREC and to member states via like national telecoms ministries and so on. So please, please make your voice heard. If this is really what is proposed, my view is it needs to change. Thank you.
Greg Chawles of ISC, but just speaking from a personal point of view, and this sounds like some junior lawyer in Brussels, so ChatGPT, derive me a policy and include the kitchen sink. And I know Jim has left the room, but just coming back to his point about library websites, it sounds as though they would be included as well.
Yeah.
Blake Willis, Interconnection Policy Person. Thank you very much for putting together this concise overview. It's extremely helpful, especially when presenting things like this to management that maybe have other things to worry about. Do you think the Commission intends for any other organizations besides BEREC to be the primary enforcement vehicle for this, or is it primarily directed at BEREC will do this?
So I think BEREC or national regulators, yes. And there's also provisions as part of the Act to create something called the Office for Digital Networks, which is going to be kind of linked to BEREC. The relationship is not quite clear. But yes, it's either the European regulatory organization, which will produce the guidelines, or national regulators that will kind of implement and monitor and manage this. And obviously, every national regulator has slightly different views on different things, so that can lead to regulatory inconsistency across Europe as well. And the potential for perhaps people forum shopping for a regulator who may be more favorable to one point of view or another, if they do have one of these disputes, as, oh, well, we're going to have the dispute resolution here because I think I might get a better deal than if we go and have it in country B, right?
Thanks. Just to follow up on that, does the word digital single market appear in this document? Because what you described is the opposite of that.
I think it does, but yeah. And there are other proposals that are about harmonization and making things more consistent. So that is true. Wow, we've got a queue.
Hi, Harold Sommer, speaking for myself. A couple of years ago, we had a roundtable with Mr. Thierry Breton, and it was very obvious what his goal is. He dreams of Europe having 5 incumbent carriers, and that's it. They're doing all the business that hundreds and thousands of ISP are doing. And from my perspective, I think the community and the organizations around the internet did a big mistake not being involved in all these discussions. I think RIPE and other organizations should spend much more money to be a lobbyer for a better internet. Thank you.
Yeah, that was exactly my point.
I think just to follow up on those two, I think it's also true that, and I think there's one of the civil society organizations has produced data about the number of meetings that Thierry Breton had with different stakeholders, and he was certainly meeting big European incumbent telecoms operators much more than he was meeting other people. Whether that was because people weren't asking or because he'd rather have meetings with his friends, I don't know. Yeah.
Jim Reid, unaffiliated. Interesting presentation, Mike, and there's a lot of stuff there to digest and think about. So thank you very much for giving a summary of what's coming out from all this DNA. I think it's very, very valuable what you've done there. So I've got an observation and a question. So the observation is, you mentioned in the presentation that potentially for people forum shopping for regulators that are kind of be susceptible to their point of view for a particular case of an implementation. And that kind of reminds me of, we've gone through all this before with NIST directors and also with data protection directors. We've seen all that kind of forum shopping happening before, and no doubt we're going to see it happen again. But my question is slightly off topic, is that how does this all play out in a UK context? Does the UK get a Brexit bonus for having to ignore all this stuff?
I think the UK probably has its own challenges with its own domestic legislation as well at certain times, right?
Okay.
So yeah, I think one of the key things here is like all this vast expansion of scope is there's no market failure that justifies that regulation, right? There doesn't appear to be a market failure between equipment vendors and telecoms operators, or in IP interconnection, for example. So why all this is being brought into scope is really unclear.
So thank you for this presentation. It was excellent, also one in Bucharest. So I can pose my comment as a question, but it's more a comment. So my name is Danko Evtovic. I was also more involved in some of the discussions with the European Commission. It was more about domain names. And for example, on the intent to regulate, I remember there was discussion how to regulate root servers. And there was no understanding in the top echelons of the European Commission, also what RIPE is doing and what the root servers are functioning. So they're very easy with the idea to regulate. And I think this presentation is kind of a warning for this community. And I think we need to be more proactive in talking to them on time. Other problem is that once you try to talk, as you probably do with the Commission, they say, oh, we have our own experts. And their experts are mostly coming from the telco sector. So it's a challenge. And the understanding of how TCP/IP brought the idea of freedom to connect and innovate to internet is something that is, I don't think, really functioning in Brussels. So we need to do more and be proactive more. Same as my colleagues. Thanks.
100%. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, running over.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce the final presentation in this session. It's with Hisham Ibrahim, who will be speaking about the RIPE NCC engagement across public policy consultations and other work. Hisham, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for that, Des. Hello, everyone. This is the last talk of the session, and I'll try to make up for the time so that everybody leaves on time for the lunch. My name is Hisham Ibrahim. I'm the Chief Community Officer at the RIPE NCC, and I'll be giving overview of some of the work that the NCC has been doing in the public policy and internet governance sphere.
We're coming off of 2 very busy years, one with GTC, the other one with WSIS Plus 20, and this year we have the planning pot ahead of us. And while usually you would see some of my colleagues coming to stage, Roman or Shafiq or others, giving a little bit more of a deep dive on some of the areas and topics that we've been discussing, because there's been so many different topics, we thought that it might be good to have one presentation that just kind of covers everything that we've been busy doing. I mentioned I'm the Chief Community Officer at the RIPE NCC, and this is one of the last times I'll be able to show this slide because it covers the bits about the 5-year strategy that we had that we're going to be replacing now with a new strategy after that it gets approved. But this kind of forms the basis of what we call the external engagement and community part of the RIPE NCC. Starting from the bottom right here, being a center of excellence and for data measurements and insights, within that team, we have the team that does the research, that takes the data, the measurements that our colleagues in technology have with RIS and RIPE Atlas and others, and they start to build reports on that. We have a data storytelling team that visualize and tells very nice graphical stories about how to interpret and see the data that we use for our different engagements. And if you go up, you see create and foster environments and dialogues throughout the service region to remain a highly engaged community. While we use these reports in the different meetings, the different NOGs, the different internet governance meetings and others that we participate in to be able to generate dialogue and help explain how things are. If you go from the bottom to the left, then you can see increased community knowledge through learning and development. So within the team, we also have the teams that do the training. So they develop the curriculum based on understanding the needs and based on the data that we're seeing and based on what we hear from the community. And then they go out and deliver that. And as you can see, all 3 of these elements, they tie back to one of the key things here, which is being resilient in face of political, legislative, and regulatory changes that impact or that have the potential of to affect our operations or internet governance for that matter. So we use all of these. We go to any governmental engagement that we do, and we say we can offer training for your techies, we can do these meetings for your community, we can provide you with these reports, all kind of adding towards that, preserving the technical coordination and internet governance as we know it. Now, this area is roughly a quarter of the staff in the RIPE NCC and a quarter of its budget as well. So this is how big we consider this area. Now, global internet governance, like I said, we've come out of 2 big years of a lot of political engagements in many parts of the world, not just in our service region. I will be highlighting some of them. These slides focus mainly on from the last RIPE meeting till now, but some of these things that took place at the end of the year had effects throughout the year, and one of them was WSIS Plus 20. So that's something that took up most of the year in the work that we're doing. The RIPE NCC produced fact sheets in several languages, English, Arabic, and Russian, on well, WSIS Plus 20 and the vision that we wanted to see coming into that. We organized an open house for the community to solicit feedback, also translated into multiple languages. I believe Des was moderating that session, and we had different participants from different parts of our service region, the Arabic-speaking, the Russian-speaking, and European parts, to be able to add their perspectives on how they saw the discussions around WSIS, and that formed the base for a lot of the fact sheets and information that we were providing. You can also see, and I won't read the slides in details, also being mindful of the time, the number of responses that we put forward to the different processes, the elements paper, the zero draft, and others. Bringing it, there was the IGF meeting in Oslo and the WSIS Plus 20 high-level meeting in Geneva. But bringing it towards the end of the year, there was the Younger meeting in New York, where the NCC had 3 people. We had Desiree heading the delegation from the community side, but we also had my 2 colleagues, Elena and Shafiq, that were both part of country delegations, Elena being part of the Dutch delegation, Shafiq being part of the Lebanese delegation, to take part of the discussions around WSIS. We welcome the output of that, the reformation of the multi-stakeholder, the IGF permanent UN forum, and of course aligning the WSIS action lines. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this already. Bringing it to ITU engagements, we've been doing a lot with the ITU and in this area as well. A lot of the work that we've been doing, we've boxed it into three main boxes. Resiliency, when we talk about everything related to interconnection, peering, ASNs, resilience when it comes to DNS, K-root, and all the other bits, talking about how that is useful and good. And we've heard really good presentations about resilience today, so I don't need to go into too much detail of that. Scalability when it comes to IPv6 as well, and what does that mean for the rest of the world, and also routing security. And these have been the main elements that we talk about. Of course, there's the stability, which we measure through our internet measurements bits, but these are the bits that we provide evidence-based insights to some of the study groups and some of the discussions that happen when there are proposals from some member states about new ideas, about new IPs or IPv6 pluses or any of the other bits there, while documenting some of the success stories that we've had with different engagements. Capacity building, so like I mentioned, we have the training, we have the online RIPE NCC Academy, where we are hosting that on several different platforms, one of them being the ITU e-learning platforms, and of course defending the technical coordination and RIR model. Some of the things that happened last year was, well, the joint declaration with ITUD on IPv6, Partner to Connect. This is where we pledge to do training and capacity work throughout our service region. We've been a part of this program for a few years now, engagement with the different study groups, GSR, my colleague Shafiq was just in Turkey for this, WTDC, WTPF, and of course this year there's a lot of work in the preparatory work going up to Planipot later this year. So as you can see, there's a large amount of work that happens here, and the team that looks into this specifically is a team of 7-8 people, but we are spread a bit thin across all of these things, but we do make a point of participating and engaging in all of these forums and responding to consultations when they are online. One of the things that I won't spend too much time on here because we will be discussing in the next services session, ENOM is a topic that I wrote an article on a week ago, I believe. We went to the ITU recently, the study group 2 and the TSB, talking about what the operational review that the RIPE NCC has done. If you want to hear more about it, it will be covered in the services working group in more details. EU engagement. Again, won't go into all the details, but we have been actively engaging around stuff like the International Digital Strategy for the EU, NIS2 implementation, and the simplification proposals around the CSA2 revision. And as you can see from the slide, I won't read all the details, but it talks about encouraging the strong multi-stakeholder approach. In these two specifically, one of the we recommended providing more clarity and justification for the collection of IP ranges as part of the process to better understand what that is needed, obviously affecting us and our community, so having better understanding there, and of course encouraging that none of the initiatives lead to any fragmentation. Again, some of this talks that were covered already. As part of continuing the work within the EU context, we don't just work with the Commission, we work with BEREC, reports that were mentioned and others. We meet with them regularly and have a lot of discussions with ENISA, with other players in the EU here, but also there's the Internet Standards Deployment Multi-Stakeholder Forum that was recently launched by the Commission, which we actively participate in at least 3 of the work streams related to DNS, internet routing, and protocols IPv6. Engagement with governments and roundtables. So since we met last year, we have held 3 government roundtables. One towards dedicated for the Middle Eastern and North African countries. Last year we did this in combination with Afrinet. It was held in Egypt, Cairo. where, again, a lot of topics about engagement and how the NCC has done successful use cases in their countries, sharing experiences was held there. We did the one in Brussels earlier this year, where the topics of aligning the implementation of WSIS plus 20 and what does that mean moving forward was covered, as well as work on standards. And the Southeast European Roundtable, where we met with the regulators from that part of the world that have their own unique set of challenges and opportunities with the mix that they have, some of them EU, some of them non-EU based, some of them aspiring and such. Caucasus in Central Asia, again, for the sake of time, the slides are available, but the focus there is mostly on peering and interconnection. That's a big thing in that part of the world. We've been running a very successful peering and interconnection forum there for the past 4 years. The environment there, the peering and interconnections landscape is changing very rapidly. We get everybody in those meetings, from the C-level of the telecos to the governmental incumbents to the techies to the people aspiring to build IXPs there. And we've been delivering on some of the MOUs that we have there. Routing security is also a big topic for them. And as you can see, we customize per part of our service region the approach that we take and what topics are relevant for them, and not just hit them with every topic that we are working on. With the ARA group, focus being, again, on IXP and resiliency, a big thing, but also IPv6 and routing security, again, with a number of MOUs and partnerships that we have. Which brings me to my last 2 slides here. The MOUs. So last year, you would have seen Hans Peter put up a number of slides that had him shaking hands and taking photos with MOUs that we've signed last year. We've signed 8 MOUs with different organizations from different stakeholders in different parts of our service region. Some of them industry groups, some of them intergovernmental organizations. And also, if you look at the countries that we've signed with regulators, there's a nice geographical balance in our service region. Some people have been asking, are we going to continue to scale this and do this with every country in our service region? The answer to that is sadly no. We do not have the resources to do this, because as part of every MOU, we do put certain obligations on us and deliveries that we would like to see. And to give an example of that is one that we didn't sign last year. We've signed a while back, but to give an example of delivering on some of these is the MOU that we have with Europol. So my colleague Dick Leaning, who may or may not be in the room here, but I'm sure a lot of you know him, works on engaging with law enforcement agencies to help also clarify, and competent authorities to help clarify some misunderstandings or minimize potential misarbitration or other topics like that. We have developed a few courses for them. We've done a few workshops, but as of late, we've done in April, we've done an online webinar with the cooperation of Europol, where we had over 600 law enforcement agency officers that were attending these webinars. 7 countries. It was very well attended, as you can see. It was highly appreciated, and this is the kind of stuff that we keep on trying to do and keeps us busy. I try to stick within time, so thank you very much. Happy to take questions if there are any.
Hello. Thank you. I'm going to keep it short. Maria from the Swedish University Network. I just want to say thank you so much for the really good presentations and good work with the Cooperation Working Group co-chair as usual. And I had a lot of good comments from the floor, so I don't need to repeat them. But I think it's really important that we need to engage. So thank you very much, Hisham, and your team and the RIPE NCC for doing this engagement. Apparently, it is very important, and we heard some a little bit scary results of how it, maybe good intentions, I would like to say good intentions for the regulator, could end up in a very messy result. So capacity building, engagement, and reach out as we do, I need to increase that. And that was also some of the comments from the floor that we heard last. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Maria.
Hi, Vicki Riss from ISC. Again, thank you for taking on this job. It's a huge job. I just wanted to mention one small contribution. The ICANN SAC organization put together a working group to write a document aimed at regulators trying to explain both a little bit how the DNS works technically, but mostly how open source is important on the internet, because regulators didn't really understand the open source business model. And I think there's also a slide deck that goes along with that, which I think is quite understandable for regulators. And I would just like to recommend that if it's useful to anybody talking to regulators.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And it was Martin Erickson from NLNet who led that effort.
Yeah, thank you for that. Jim.
Jim Reid, unaffiliated. I don't have a comment at this stage for you, Hisham, but this is really just for Yulf. I'm very sorry to see that you're stepping down as co-chair, and you'll be a hard act to follow.
Maybe as a closing remark, as I leave the stage, one thing that I will say is the RIPE NCC proactively engages on matters that relate to, well, internet management, internet number resource management, or internet governance, or matters that relate to the RIPE NCC. However, there's also the role that we play as secretariat to the community. So through the working group here, like has been done before with that small task force that produced a paper on fair share, if there are similar efforts from the community, as Secretariat, we are more than happy to take that back through the channels that we're building through our engagement and deliver that. So please, this is an open call for the working group here. If there are topics that you feel we haven't covered or we don't have the mandate to cover, but you feel is relevant, please get in contact with us, organize yourselves, and we'll be more than happy to work on those. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Please do not forget to rate the talks. Thank you for your patience. And just a short announcement. In this room at 1:30, there will be an IPv6 Advanced Kahoot quiz, and it's an opportunity to join and win an exclusive IPv6 t-shirt. Thank you again. See you online.